Tonight, travelers, you're going on a gentle journey through Celtic life, where we'll explore the unhurried rhythms of ancient craftsmanship. That's right, we're traveling back roughly 2,500 years, to a time when bronze gleamed like captured sunlight and iron represented the cutting edge of human achievement. Let yourself settle in as we watch skilled hands transform raw materials into the objects that shaped daily existence across the Celtic world. Get comfortable, turn on a fan for some noise, and let's start. You wake before dawn in your roundhouse, though the darkness outside tells you sunrise remains at least an hour away. The banked fire in the central hearth glows like a sleeping cat's eye, casting just enough light to see the packed earth floor beneath your feet. The air smells of wood smoke, dried herbs hanging from the rafters, and the faint mustiness of the wattle and daub walls that have kept out winter's worst for 3 generations now. Your settlement sits on a gentle hillside overlooking a river valley, positioned where your grandfather's grandfather first decided the view of potential enemies mattered more than level ground. 47 roundhouses cluster together within a boundary marked by a timber palisade and a ditch that fills with water when the autumn rains arrive. Some Roman scholars will later call your people primitive for living in round buildings instead of rectangular ones, which strikes you as the sort of thing only someone with too much time for thinking would worry about. The settlement wakes slowly. You hear Brenno's coughing in the house next to yours. That same persistent cough he's had since the wet season started. Someone's pigs are already rooting around near the midden heap, making those peculiar grunting sounds that always remind you of your uncle trying to talk with his mouth full. A baby cries briefly, then quiets, probably convinced by a mother's breast that the world isn't so terrible after all. You step outside, wrapping your woolen cloak tighter against the morning chill. The sky has that particular quality of pre-dawn grayness, where everything looks like it's carved from the same piece of soft stone. Dew has settled on everything, making the grass heavy and the spider webs between the fence posts look like scattered jewelry someone forgot to put away. The communal ovens sit cold at this hour, their stone domes looking like sleeping tortoises in the dim light. By midday, they'll radiate enough heat to make you step back, but now they're just dark shapes against the gradually lightening sky. You can see the outline of the forge at the settlement's edge, recognizing it by the way smoke always seems to linger around it, even when no fire burns, as if the building itself has absorbed years of metal working and can't quite forget. Your hands are already thinking about the day's work before your mind fully catches up. This happens more as you get older. Your body remembers the patterns of labor so thoroughly that conscious thought becomes almost optional. Your fingers flex slightly, anticipating the familiar grip of tools you've held thousands of times. The calluses on your palms have their own geography, a landscape of hardened skin that tells the story of your life's work more clearly than words ever could. The settlement's dogs begin their morning rounds, nosing around the houses in their eternal quest for scraps. One of them, a rangy creature with fur the color of dead grass, stops to look at you with that peculiar expression dogs get when they're deciding whether you're worth begging from. You have nothing to offer, and somehow the dog knows this before you do, moving on without bothering to try. Other people emerge from their homes, moving with the slow deliberation of bodies not yet fully convinced that sleep is over. Morna appears from the house 3 down from yours, already dressed and looking far too alert for someone who stayed up late the previous night helping with a difficult birth. She waves, and you wave back, and this silent exchange contains all the communication necessary for a morning where words still feel like too much effort. The river below catches the first hint of approaching sunrise, its surface turning from black to pewter. You've crossed that river countless times, and know exactly where the stones sit stable enough for stepping. and where the current runs deceptively quick. In summer, children play in the shallows, shrieking at the cold water with that particular joy that belongs exclusively to the young. In winter, chunks of ice float downstream, like small ships heading for a sea they'll never reach. Smoke begins rising from other hearths now, as families coax their banked fires back to life. The smoke moves straight up in the still air, thin columns that mark each dwelling, like fingers pointing at the gradually brightening sky. You can tell which families woke first by whose smoke rises highest, though this is the sort of observation that serves no practical purpose whatsoever, which somehow makes it more satisfying to notice. The palisade fence circles the settlement like a wooden embrace, its posts weathered silver grey by seasons of rain and sun. Your people cut those trees 7 years ago from the forest on the far side of the valley, hauling them uphill with ropes and determination, and probably more cursing than the elders approved of. The fence won't stop a determined army, but it keeps livestock from wandering off and gives everyone something to lean against when they need to think. You can smell porridge cooking somewhere, that warm scent of oats and water that means someone's already further along with their morning than you are. Your own stomach reminds you that it exists and has opinions about being empty, but there's water to fetch first, and the day's tasks to consider, and 100 other small necessities that stand between waking and eating. The bronzesmith's workshop occupies a privileged position near the settlement center, close enough to the communal areas that everyone can marvel at the work, but far enough from the houses that flying sparks won't set someone's roof thatch on fire. You've known Caradoc the smith since you were both children playing the same games on these same paths, back when neither of you imagined you'd spend your lives transforming earth and fire into objects of beauty and utility. The workshop consists of a 3-sided structure with a thatched roof, open on one side to let smoke escape and light enter. The floor is hard-packed earth mixed with clay, stained dark from years of quenching hot metal. Tools hang from wooden pegs driven into the posts, hammers of various sizes, tongs with jaws shaped for different purposes, and files that can whisper metal into submission. A large stone anvil sits at working height, its surface marked with thousands of tiny dents that record decades of patient hammering. This morning, you're helping Caradoc cast a new bronze mirror, which requires more precision than you'd think something meant for vanity would need. The mirror will eventually belong to a chieftain's daughter in a settlement 3 valleys over. Part of a marriage arrangement that involves so many negotiations, you lost track of who agreed to what. Bronze mirrors are particularly prized because they can be polished to a brightness that water's surface can never quite match, letting people see themselves with a clarity that's sometimes more than they bargained for. The bronze itself came from tin and copper, mixed in proportions, that Caradoc learned from his father, who learned from his father, stretching back through generations of smiths who probably argued about the exact ratios with the same passion people. Now bring to debating anything that can't be definitively proven. Too much tin makes the bronze brittle. Too little, and it won't hold an edge or a shine. The perfect mixture produces that warm golden color that makes bronze objects look like they're lit from within. You watch Caradoc prepare the mold, which he carved from fine-grained stone over the past 3 days. The design shows a pattern of spirals and curves that seem to fold in on themselves in ways that make your eyes feel briefly confused if you stare too long. Celtic art rarely contains straight lines, as if your people collectively decided that nature doesn't work that way. So why should human hands? The spirals will stand out in relief on the finished mirror's back, giving fingers something to trace, while the owner's mind wanders during long winter evenings. The crucible sits in the forge, which Caradoc heated earlier using charcoal that burns hotter than wood ever could. The charcoal comes from the forest, made by people who spend weeks at a time living in temporary camps. tending earth-covered mounds, where wood slowly transforms in an oxygen-starved environment. You've never understood exactly why the process works, only that it does, which describes a surprising amount of ancient technology when you think about it. Caradoc uses long tongs to grip the crucible, lifting it from the forge with the careful intensity of someone who knows molten metal forgives no mistakes. The bronze inside glows orange-yellow, looking more like captured sunlight than solid matter. Heat radiates from it in waves you can feel on your face from 2 paces away. He moves with practiced smoothness, carrying the crucible to where the stone mold waits on a bed of sand. "Ready," he says, which is your signal to steady the mold while he pours. The bronze flows like honey, if honey could glow, and had the potential to cause serious burns. It fills the carved channels in the stone, seeking every depression and curve with liquid determination. Small wisps of smoke rise where the metal meets stone, carrying a smell that's sharp and vaguely metallic, obvious in hindsight. The spirals fill up from bottom to top, the pattern appearing in reverse as bronze takes the place of absence. Caradoc sets the empty crucible aside, and you both step back to let the metal cool. This part requires patience, which is in abundant supply during a life where almost everything moves at the speed of human hands and animal feet. The bronze will change color as it cools, from that intense orange through cherry red to a dull glow to finally just warm metal that looks like metal again. Rushing it would crack the casting, turning hours of work into an expensive lesson in thermodynamics that won't be properly understood for another 1,000 years or so. While you wait, Caradoc tidies his workspace with the particular fussiness that comes from working in a profession where misplaced tools can mean wasted time or burned fingers. He's in his 40s now, with grey showing in his beard and the kind of lean strength that comes from years of hammering metal. His hands are scarred in ways that form their own map of past mistakes and successful saves, white lines crossing darker skin in patterns as unique as fingerprints. "The last mirror I made for that family," Caradoc says, breaking the comfortable silence, "came back cracked within a month. Not the bronze. The bronze was fine. The girl had used it to signal her lover, catching sunlight and flashing it across the valley. Apparently her father noticed the unusual behavior of light and investigated." He shakes his head, looking amused. Young people will find ways to complicate their lives, regardless of what tools you give them. The bronze has cooled enough now that you can see the spiral pattern clearly, raised lines against the mirror's back surface. Later, after the mirror comes out of the mold, Caradoc will spend hours filing and polishing the front surface until it reflects images with startling clarity. He'll remove any casting imperfections, smooth, rough edges, and bring out that distinctive bronze glow that makes the metal so desirable. The back design will remain as cast, its spirals ready to catch fingers and eyes for generations to come. The iron forge sits at the settlement's edge, positioned downwind so the smoke and smell blow away from the houses. Iron's arrival changed everything. Bronze smiths can tell you exactly how and why, usually with some bitterness mixed into their historical accuracy. Iron ore is simply more common than the copper and tin needed for bronze, found in bog deposits and certain rock formations that dot the landscape like geological promises. A culture that masters iron suddenly has access to tools and weapons in quantities that bronze could never match. The blacksmith's name is Ruad, which means red, though whether that refers to his hair color or the iron oxide stains permanently embedded in his skin remains unclear. Probably both. He's younger than Caradoc, barely 30, but he learned his craft from a smith who traveled all the way from the continent, bringing techniques that originated even further east. Iron forging spread across the Celtic world the way useful ideas do, carried by traders, captured in raids, taught by wandering craftsmen looking for work, and occasionally rediscovered by stubborn experimenters who refuse to believe something couldn't be done. Today, Ruad is forging a new plowshare, which is about as practical as metalworking gets. The old one finally broke after 7 seasons of hitting rocks that somehow hide just beneath the soil surface, waiting patiently to destroy farming equipment. Bronze plowshares worked, but they needed constant sharpening and replacement. Iron shares hold their edge longer, bite deeper, and make cultivation possible in heavier soils that would have defeated earlier farmers. This represents the kind of technological improvement that changes civilization without anyone quite noticing it's happening. The forge itself is a stone-lined hearth fed by a bellows that Ruad operates with his foot, leaving both hands free for working the metal. The bellows consists of 2 wooden boards connected by leather sides, opening and closing like mechanical lungs to force air into the fire's heart. Each pump sends a surge of oxygen that makes the charcoal glow brighter and hotter, reaching temperatures where iron becomes workable. Sparks float upward whenever the bellows pushes air through the coals. Tiny orange stars that die almost immediately in the cooler air above. Ruad pulls the iron from the fire using long tongs, moving quickly now because iron cools faster than bronze. The metal glows yellow-orange, not quite as bright as molten bronze, but hot enough that you instinctively step back when he swings it toward the anvil. The anvil is iron itself, harder than the bronze ones Caradoc uses, and it rings with a different tone when struck. Clearer, sharper, the sound carrying across the settlement like a metallic announcement. He begins hammering with rhythmic strikes that sound almost musical. If music could be made by hitting very hot metal very hard. Each blow flattens and spreads the iron, gradually transforming a rough bar into the angled shape a plowshare needs. Ruad works the metal from the center outward, rotating it constantly on the anvil, checking the shape with practiced eyes between strikes. Sparks fly with each hammer blow, tiny fragments of scale that flake off the iron surface as it oxidizes in the oxygen-rich environment. The sound of forging carries a particular authority. Neighbors know when the blacksmith is working and can gauge the size of the project by the hammering's intensity and duration. Children sometimes gather to watch from a safe distance, fascinated by the combination of fire and strength and the magical transformation of dull, rock-like ore into shining, useful metal. Their parents watch too, though they pretend not to, because there's something fundamentally compelling about watching someone who knows exactly what they're doing do it extremely well. Ruad plunges the shaped iron into a water trough between heating cycles, and the water explodes into steam with a sound like a giant sigh. This quenching process does complicated things to the iron's crystalline structure that neither you nor Ruad could explain in modern metallurgical terms, but he knows from experience exactly how long to heat it, how hard to hammer, and how quickly to cool it to produce metal with the right combination of hardness and toughness. Too hard, and it shatters. Too soft, and it bends. Getting it right requires the kind of embodied knowledge that takes years to develop and minutes to demonstrate. The iron turns black as it cools, scale forming on its surface like a dark skin. Ruad will file this off later, revealing the grayish metal underneath. Unlike bronze's warm golden glow, iron looks somber, practical, and uninterested in beauty for its own sake. This aesthetic difference bothers some traditionalists who think bronze's appearance reflects something important about the proper relationship between craft and art. Ruad, when asked about this, usually shrugs and mentions that plows don't need to be pretty, just functional. He returns the iron to the forge for another heating, pumping the bellows until the charcoal bed glows with an intensity that makes the air shimmer above it. The settlement's iron supply comes from multiple sources, some mined from rock deposits in the hills, some extracted from bog iron that accumulates where groundwater deposits iron oxide in wetland sediments. Bog iron smells particularly distinctive when smelted, a combination of earth and metal and organic matter that would make a terrible perfume, but signals productivity to anyone familiar with ironworking. The plowshare takes shape gradually, each heating and hammering session bringing it closer to the form Ruad envisions. He works the point to a sharp edge that will slice through soil and roots, reinforces the section that will take the greatest stress when rock meets resistance, and thins the wings that will turn the earth aside as the plow cuts its furrow. His hammer strikes vary in force and placement, gentle taps for delicate shaping, heavy blows for substantial material movement. The iron glows, cools, and heats again, submitting slowly to human will backed by fire and force. Iron democratizes metalworking, Ruad said once, during a conversation that probably involved enough beer to make philosophy seem worthwhile. Any settlement with ore and knowledge can make tools now. Bronze required trade networks, tin from far away, and copper from somewhere else. Iron just requires determination, and ore you can dig yourself. He paused, then added, "Of course, determination and local resources don't make you a good smith. That still takes years of practice and burned fingers." The sheep graze on the hillside above the settlement, moving across the grass with the methodical persistence of animals whose entire life philosophy revolves around eating and occasionally making more sheep. Your people have kept sheep for longer than anyone can remember, back beyond the point where memory fades into legend and legends simplify into simple statements like, "We have always had sheep." The animals provide wool, meat, milk, and leather, which makes them substantially more useful than they initially appear while standing in a field looking vaguely confused. Spring means shearing, that annual event when you separate sheep from their winter coats in a process that benefits everyone except possibly the sheep, who seem to have mixed feelings about the entire affair. Skilled shearers can remove a fleece in one piece, unzipping the wool from the animal with long cuts that follow the body's natural contours. Less skilled shearers, which includes you the first several dozen times you tried, end up with wool in pieces, occasional small cuts on both sheep and human fingers, and a strong sense that this task looks easier when someone else does it. The sheep you're working on this morning has the typical Celtic sheep build, smaller than modern breeds, hardier, with wool that comes in various colors from white through gray to brown and black. Natural colored wool is valuable precisely because it comes already dyed, though dyers will point out that their craft can produce colors sheep never dreamed of in their wildest grass-eating fantasies. This particular sheep is grayish-brown, the color of storm clouds reflected in muddy water, which will make wool that blends beautifully with the landscape or disappears into shadows depending on your perspective and immediate needs. You've gotten better at shearing over the years, your hands learning the angle that cuts wool cleanly without cutting skin underneath. The shears are iron now, another improvement iron brought, holding an edge longer than bronze ever could. The blades make a distinctive sound as they close, a metallic whisper that accompanies the soft, tearing noise of wool separating from sheep. The animal stands relatively still, experiencing that unique combination of resignation and relief that comes from enduring something unpleasant that ultimately makes you more comfortable. The fleece comes away in sections, still attached to itself in a mat that reflects the sheep's body shape. Raw wool smells like sheep, an earthy, lanolin-heavy scent that's not quite unpleasant once you get used to it, which happens faster than you'd expect, given that urban people 2,000 years in the future will find the smell remarkably strong. The lanolin makes the wool water resistant and gives it a slightly greasy feel that protects your hands while you work. Once shorn, the sheep looks startled by its own lightness, shaking itself experimentally, as if checking whether all its parts still work correctly. The wool removed probably weighs about 3 pounds, though your measurements involve comparison to known objects rather than standardized units. 3 pounds of wool represent countless hours of grazing, the sheep converting grass into protein, into fiber, through biological processes that remain mysterious even as their results become practical necessities. The fleece goes into a basket, with others collected this morning, 12 so far, with more to come. Later, someone will sort through them, removing any debris, checking for quality variations, and separating different colors for different purposes. Celtic wool comes in enough natural shades that clever weavers can create patterns using only natural colors. Though dyed wool remains popular for anyone wanting colors sheep simply cannot produce through any amount of selective breeding. Washing the wool comes next in its transformation from sheep covering to useful fiber. Raw wool contains dirt, plant material, sheep sweat, and substantial amounts of lanolin that must be removed before spinning. The washing happens in the river during warm weather, with wool submerged in flowing water and worked by hand until it runs clean. Cold water works better than hot for this initial cleaning, though hot water will come later when you want to set dyes. The river downstream of a wool washing operation turns briefly cloudy, carrying away months of accumulated sheep life. After washing, the wool must dry, spread on racks, or laid across bushes in the sun. Damp wool smells more intense than dry wool, as if wetness activates scent compounds that otherwise remain dormant. Birds sometimes steal small amounts of drying wool for their nests, which makes sense when you think about wool's insulating properties and how a bird might appreciate that on a cold spring morning before eggs hatch. The loom stands against the round house's inner wall, its vertical frame reaching from floor to ceiling, like a wooden ladder designed by someone who misunderstood the assignment. This is a warp-weighted loom, the type your people have used for generations, where vertical threads, the warp, hang from a top beam held in tension by clay weights at the bottom. The weights click softly against each other when you work the loom, making a sound like distant stones falling in water. Spinning comes before weaving, that transformation of wool into thread through twist and tension. The spindle is a simple tool, a wooden shaft with a weight at one end called a whirl. But using it well requires practice that translates into muscle memory in your hands and forearms. You attach a leader thread to the spindle, then draw out wool fibers from the prepared fleece, allowing twist from the spinning whirl to run up into the fiber and hold it together as thread. The spindle rotates, drops, and hangs, suspended by its own thread, while you draw out more fiber. Then you wind the completed thread onto the shaft and begin again. Spinning occupies hands, while leaving minds free for conversation, which makes it popular work for groups gathered around hearth fires during long winter evenings. The steady rhythm becomes almost meditative. Draw, spin, wind, repeat. Thousands of repetitions produce enough thread for a garment, tens of thousands for larger weavings. Your hands work almost automatically now, fingers knowing exactly how much twist makes strong thread, how evenly fibers should be drawn, and when to add more wool to keep the thread consistent. The thread varies in thickness, depending on its intended purpose. Fine thread for delicate inner garments, thicker thread for outer cloaks that must block wind and rain, and very thick thread for blankets and wall hangings where warmth matters more than flexibility. You can judge thread quality better by feel than by sight, your fingers detecting inconsistencies in thickness or twist that eyes might miss. A good thread has an even feel, like running your fingers along a smooth rope that happens to be much smaller. At the loom, you work from top to bottom, creating fabric that grows downward as you weave. The warp threads hang in order, the clay weights keeping them taut enough for the horizontal weft thread to pass between them. Heddle rods separate the warp into two sets, front threads and back threads, creating the shed through which you pass the weft. Lifting one heddle creates a gap where threads in back come forward, and you pass the weft through this opening using a wooden shuttle, or sometimes just your fingers for narrow work. Each pass of the weft requires beating it into place with the beater, a flat piece of wood or bone that compacts the newly added thread against the previous row. The compaction determines the fabric's final density. Loose beating creates open, lightweight cloth. Firm beating produces dense, warm fabric that resists wind and water. The beater makes a satisfying thump against the warp threads, a sound that punctuates weaving the way a heartbeat punctuates life. Patterns emerge through color changes and the warp and weft structure itself. Plaid patterns, called tartan in later times, work well with this loom type, created by alternating colored threads in both warp and weft. Stripes run easily, requiring only color changes in one direction. More complex patterns need careful planning, keeping track of which threads lift when, and maintaining the sequence across hundreds of individual picks. Some weavers mark patterns with knotted strings or carved sticks, creating external memory when the pattern exceeds what human memory can comfortably hold. The cloth growing on your loom will become a cloak, the kind that wraps around the body and fastens at one shoulder with a bronze brooch. The pattern shows subtle stripes in natural wool colors, brown, gray, and cream, that will blend with the landscape, while providing the kind of sturdy warmth that makes outdoor work bearable during cold seasons. No dyes are needed for this piece, just careful selection of naturally colored wool and attention to the stripe pattern during warping. Your back aches slightly from the angle the loom requires, standing work that keeps you in one position for extended periods. Weaving rewards patience and consistency, qualities that sound boring until you're wearing clothes someone made through patient, consistent effort. The cloth accumulates slowly, a few inches per day of steady work, but steadiness compounds. A week produces enough for a simple garment. A month could clothe several people, and a year creates enough fabric to trade for other goods the settlement needs. The forest provides materials that shape daily life as thoroughly as any metal, and more abundantly. Your people work wood with skills refined over countless generations, understanding how different species behave under tools, which woods split cleanly and which resist, what bends without breaking, and what breaks if you look at it wrong. This knowledge fills no written manual, because writing hasn't reached your settlement yet, existing instead in hands and eyes and the casual way experienced woodworkers assess timber. Oak for strength and permanence, posts that will support roundhouse roofs, water buckets that won't crack, and furniture meant to last generations. Ash for flexibility and shock absorption, tool handles, spear shafts, anything that must bend slightly rather than break. Willow for baskets and hurdles, growing straight when coppiced and splitting easily into workable strips. Hazel for quick-growing poles, fencing, and the wattle that becomes house walls when daubed with a clay and dung mixture. Alder for work that stays wet, resisting rot in waterlogged conditions. Each wood has its purpose, its personality, and its proper applications. The woodworker shaping a chair component this morning uses a draw knife, pulling the blade toward himself to shave curls from a length of green wood. Green wood cuts easier than dried, though it will shrink and warp as it dries, which means skilled woodworkers account for future movement in their current shaping. The curls pile at his feet like wooden ribbons, their exposed surfaces bright against the tool-darkened outer bark. Each curl records the blade's passage, the wood grain visible in the thin cross-section, like topographic maps of tiny landscapes. Chairs aren't common furniture yet. Most people sit on benches, stools, or simply the ground enhanced by cushions or hides. But important people merit chairs with backs and sometimes arms. Furniture that announces status through comfort and craftsmanship. This chair will have turned legs, made on a pole lathe where the woodworker's foot operates a treadle that rotates the wood, while hands guide cutting tools. The rotation happens in both directions, spinning forward when the treadle pushes down, pulling back when the springy pole overhead rebounds. Cutting happens only during the forward motion, which creates a distinctive rhythm of cut and release that pole lathe workers can maintain for hours. Joints fit together without metal fasteners or glue, relying instead on careful shaping and the wood's natural tendency to swell when wet and shrink when dry. A round tenon slightly oversized for its hole, assembled green, tightens permanently as it dries and shrinks against the hole's walls. Wedges driven into tenons split the end and spread it, creating mechanical locks that hold for decades or centuries. Your people have recovered furniture from ritual bog deposits that remain sound after centuries underwater. Joints still tight enough that the pieces required force to disassemble. Carving decorates special pieces, spirals and curves that echo bronze work, sometimes incorporating faces or animals or geometric patterns that please the eye while serving no structural purpose. The carver works with small knives and gouges, removing tiny amounts of wood with each cut, the design emerging gradually from patient reduction. Wood carving produces dust rather than shavings when working dry wood, fine particles that catch in your throat and turn your hands pale with accumulated residue. Wet wood carves easier, but dulls tools faster, requiring frequent sharpening on oiled stones. Bowls, platters, cups, and spoons come from careful hollowing, using gouges that remove wood in controlled bites. The bowl maker chooses wood grain carefully, orienting the bowl so the grain runs around its circumference rather than across, preventing splits that would make the vessel leak or break. Deep bowls require patience, each layer of wood removed revealing another layer underneath, the process continuing until walls thin to the desired balance of strength and lightness. The roundhouse where you live represents accumulated knowledge about shelter, refined through enough building cycles that major design flaws were eliminated generations ago. The circular shape sheds wind better than corners would, distributing stress evenly around the structure. The conical thatched roof rises to a peak above the central hearth, allowing smoke to collect under the apex and eventually find its way out through gaps in the thatch sometimes. Other times, the smoke simply fills the upper portion of the house, which bothers visitors more than residents who've grown accustomed to the atmospheric conditions. Building a roundhouse begins with posts, thick oak timbers set deep in post holes that form the circular footprint. The posts stand about 15 feet tall, their tops notched to hold the ring beam that connects them into a unified structure. Ring beam assembly requires cooperation, with multiple people lifting heavy timber into position while others secure the joints. The beam must sit level, even though the ground rarely cooperates, requiring judgment about where to dig post holes deeper or pack them higher. Rafters run from the ring beam to a central post or a smaller ring at the roof's peak, creating the skeleton that supports the thatch. The rafters are typically ash or oak, straight enough for the purpose, and secured at both ends with wooden pegs or fiber lashings. Horizontal wattle branches weave between the rafters, creating a surface the thatch can grip. The structure begins to look like a house once rafters rise, the geometry suggesting the final form, even while still open to the sky. Thatch goes on in layers, starting at the bottom edge and working upward, each row overlapping the one below, like scales on a fish or feathers on a bird. Good thatch sheds water so effectively that the interior stays dry during storms that turn the world outside into a demonstration of water's persistence. Reed thatch lasts the longest, perhaps 25 years before needing complete replacement. Straw thatch needs more frequent attention, though it works well enough and uses materials readily available from grain farming. Heather thatch serves in areas where reeds and straw are scarce, creating roofs that blend into the landscape until you're close enough to distinguish house from hillside. The walls go up separately from the roof, with wattle panels woven between vertical posts that ring the house inside the main post circle. The wattle consists of thin, flexible branches, hazel, willow and ash, woven over and under like basket making but on a much larger scale. Once the wattle weaving completes a section, workers apply daub, a mixture of clay, sand, water and dung that fills gaps, creates a weatherproof surface, and eventually hardens into something approaching permanence. Fresh daub looks messy and smells like a farmyard, which makes sense given its ingredients. Dry daub becomes hard enough that repairs require serious effort. The floor is packed earth, swept clean and maintained smooth through use and occasional deliberate resurfacing. Some houses have clay floors in the hearth area, reducing fire risk and creating a harder surface around where most work happens. Woven rush mats cover parts of the floor, adding insulation and comfort in sleeping areas. The mats wear out eventually, getting replaced with new weaving that provides something useful to do during long winter evenings when spinning and weaving get boring. Light enters through the door during daytime, supplemented by the hearth fire's glow, and occasionally by oil lamps or rush lights for detailed work after dark. Oil lamps are bronze or ceramic vessels that burn animal fat with a fiber wick, producing light that smells like whatever animal donated the fat, and creating smoke that adds to the existing atmosphere. Rush lights are dried rushes soaked in fat, held in special holders, burning relatively quickly, but costing almost nothing to produce if you live near wetlands with rush plants. The hearth forms the house's center in both physical and social terms, the place where fire lives year-round, where food cooks, and where people gather. Your hearth sits in a slight depression, its edges lined with stones that contain embers and reflect heat outward. A bronze or iron cooking pot hangs from a chain over the fire, adjustable for different cooking needs, high for rapid boiling, low for gentle simmering that won't scorch porridge or soup. Flat stones near the fire heat enough for griddle cooking, making oatcakes or flatbreads that supplement the eternal cauldron of whatever's currently edible. Knowledge transfers from older hands to younger ones through watching, trying, failing, adjusting, and eventually succeeding often enough that muscle memory takes hold. No schools exist in the formal sense, no classrooms or curricula, just apprenticeships that begin in childhood and extend into young adulthood. You learn crafts from whoever knows them, usually family members, but sometimes specialists who take on students in exchange for labor and eventual mastery that reflects well on the teacher. The young woman working beside you at the loom has been learning weaving for 2 years now, her early attempts still visible as irregular sections in practice cloths relegated to household use, where appearance matters less than function. Her hands move more confidently now, the shuttle passing through the shed smoothly, the beater striking with appropriate force. She's reached the stage where basic weaving feels natural enough that her mind can consider pattern possibilities, while her hands execute the fundamental techniques. Why do we beat the weft so firmly here, but less firmly for the border? She asks, the kind of question that shows she's thinking beyond simple imitation into understanding principles. Because the main cloth needs to be dense enough to block wind, you explain. The border will fold over and be double thickness, so it can be more open while still providing protection. Also, dense cloth wears better where it takes the most stress, shoulders, elbows, while open weave at the edges lets the garment breathe. Teaching requires breaking down actions you perform without conscious thought into steps someone else can follow. This mental reverse engineering sometimes reveals aspects of your own technique you hadn't explicitly recognized, making you a slightly better craftsperson through the act of explaining to another. The students' questions identify assumptions you'd forgotten you were making, and skills that felt so natural you'd stopped noticing them. The bronzesmith's apprentice is younger, maybe 11, spending more time at bellows operation and coal management than actual metalworking yet. This stage of apprenticeship involves substantial amounts of basic labor that benefits the master while teaching fundamental lessons about fire management, heat recognition, and the patience metalworking requires. The boy pumps the bellows with steady rhythm, watching the charcoal bed's color intensity, learning to see the difference between hot enough for copper and hot enough for iron without anyone needing to explain temperature in degrees he wouldn't understand anyway. The color tells you everything, Caradoc tells him, probably for the 20th time this month. Cherry red, orange, yellow, white. Each color means different things for different metals. Watch long enough, and your eyes learn to read fire like other people read tracks in mud. The boy nods, his attention focused on the forge, where bronze begins glowing in that particular orange that means it's ready for pouring. This moment of readiness lasts only briefly. Wait too long, and the metal cools back below working temperature. Move too soon, and it won't flow properly into the mold. Timing matters enormously in metalwork, creating pressure that keeps craftspeople alert and students nervous. Error teaches as effectively as success, sometimes more memorably. The first time you spun thread that broke repeatedly because you added too much twist, creating brittle fiber that snapped under normal tension. That lesson stuck harder than any verbal explanation of proper spinning technique. The first bowl you carved through its bottom, suddenly converting a vessel into a ring. That mistake made you permanently careful about monitoring wall thickness. Failed attempts pile up during apprenticeship, each one clarifying what success requires through the uncomfortable clarity of what doesn't work. Your life follows patterns set by daylight, seasons, and the requirements of crafts that cannot be rushed. The day begins when eyes can see well enough to work, and ends when they cannot, with firelight extending productivity into evening for tasks that don't require perfect vision. Spinning works well by firelight. Detailed carving does not. You adjust activities to available light without thinking about it. The rotation of tasks throughout the day happening naturally based on conditions. Seasons dictate larger patterns. Shearing in spring, harvest in autumn, and crafts during winter when outdoor work becomes difficult. Summer brings long days of agricultural labor, getting crops established and maintained while weather permits. Winter contracts into smaller spaces, both physical and temporal, with life concentrating around hearth fires where craft work progresses during shortened days. The year cycles through these changes with the reliability of celestial mechanics. Though you'd phrase it more as winter always comes, then spring, then summer, then autumn, then winter again. And this has happened every year anyone can remember. Craftwork resists hurrying, each process requiring whatever time it requires regardless of desire for completion. Clay pots must dry slowly or crack. Wool must be cleaned thoroughly or remain greasy. Iron must heat to the correct temperature or it won't forge properly. Wood must season or it warps. These facts form rigid boundaries around production schedules, teaching patience to anyone inclined toward impatience and frustrating people who want things immediately. The rhythm of making objects by hand creates a different relationship with possessions than future ages will have with mass-produced goods. You know exactly how long it takes to weave a cloak because you've woven cloaks. You understand the hours embedded in a bronze brooch because you've watched Caradoc make them. This knowledge creates respect for objects, careful maintenance, and repair rather than replacement. A broken tool gets fixed because making a new one requires days of work. A worn garment gets mended because weaving replacement fabric takes weeks. Community rhythms overlap with personal schedules. Market days when settlements gather for trade, seasonal festivals that mark the year's turning points, and harvest cooperation when everyone helps everyone else get crops gathered before weather turns. The metalworkers time their production to have goods ready for these gathering times, creating portable wealth in bronze jewelry, iron tools, and decorative objects that become currency in a society where coined money hasn't fully established itself. Yet, the sounds of your settlement create a daily symphony. Morning roosters, children playing, animals complaining, craftwork hammering or clattering or thumping, conversation rising and falling, and evening fires crackling. You could probably identify the time of day just by sound, even with eyes closed. The acoustic signature of different hours so distinctive that it forms its own timekeeping system, more precise than shadows and almost as reliable as hunger. The objects you create will outlast you substantially, many by centuries, some by millennia. Bronze artifacts endure particularly well. Brooches, mirrors, tools, and weapons, resisting corrosion in ways that reward archaeologists digging through the ruins of your civilization long after everyone who knew you personally has died and been forgotten. Iron corrodes more readily, but still survives as rust-marked shapes that tell stories about daily life to people who reconstruct the past from fragments. The techniques you use will continue forward through time, spreading across Celtic territories and beyond, influencing cultures that haven't been born yet, and people groups that exist only as possibilities in the future's distant fog. Weaving patterns you create today will appear on fragments of cloth preserved in bogs, giving scholars 2,000 years from now insights into textile production and aesthetic preferences. The metalworking knowledge Caradoc and Ruard possess will transfer through generations of apprentices, eventually reaching people who write it down in books that preserve what oral tradition carried for centuries. Your roundhouse will disappear relatively quickly, posts rotting, thatch collapsing, walls dissolving back into the earth from which they came. But the techniques for building it will persist, carried by people who build similar structures across the Celtic world, creating architectural continuity that helps define cultural identity. The post holes will remain as dark circles in the clay, mysterious to future excavators, until someone figures out what circular patterns of post hole stains mean, at which point your home becomes data in archaeological reports. The sheep grazing on the hillside descend from animals your ancestors domesticated so long ago that the original wild sheep no longer exist as a distinct population. Your weaving looms evolve from earlier looms, which evolve from even earlier weaving techniques, stretching back to the first person who noticed that crossing threads at right angles creates fabric. The skills you practice daily are not inventions but inheritances, passed forward from deep time, now yours to use and pass forward again. Some of what you know will be lost. Languages change, technologies supersede each other, and cultural practices fade when circumstances change. But the fundamental understanding of materials, how bronze flows, how iron forges, how wool becomes thread and then cloth, these insights persist across cultural boundaries and historical discontinuities. The basic physics of metallurgy and textile production care nothing for empires rising and falling, continuing to work the same way, regardless of who exploits them. The objects you make enter circulation beyond your immediate settlement, traded across territories, changing hands multiple times, their origins forgotten while their utility continues. The bronze brooch Caradoc fashioned last month might secure a cloak 3 valleys away within the year, owned by someone who never met the smith who made it. The wool you spun could become part of someone's winter clothing in a settlement you've never visited, keeping a person warm who doesn't know your name. This anonymity of craft means your work matters more than your identity, your skills creating value independent of personal recognition. You're not thinking about legacy while you work. You're thinking about getting the weft tension right, or whether the forge is hot enough, or if this particular piece of wood will split cleanly or fight you. The daily focus on immediate tasks creates future value without requiring conscious intention. Doing the work well, because you take pride in competence, produces artifacts that endure because they were made properly in the first place. Quality compounds across time. The late afternoon sun angles through the open door, casting long shadows across the floor. Your hands continue their work, moving through familiar patterns, creating today's portion of whatever long-term project occupies your current attention. Tomorrow will bring more of the same: wool to spin, thread to weave, bronze to pour, iron to forge, and wood to shape. The seasons will turn, festivals will mark time's passage, and the work will continue because the work must continue. Communities need clothing, tools, vessels, shelters, all the material culture that makes life more comfortable than simple survival allows. Outside, smoke rises from evening hearths as families begin preparing food. The settlement's sounds shift toward evening registers, work noises fading, conversation increasing, animals settling, and children being called inside. The light changes quality, becoming golden, then orange, then the particular purple-gray that precedes darkness. Soon you'll bank your own fire, ensuring coals survive until morning and settle into whatever evening activities seem appropriate. Conversation, quiet craft work by firelight, or simply resting after a day of physical labor. The objects surrounding you right now, clothing, tools, vessels, the building itself, all represent someone's skilled effort, their knowledge and patience transformed into useful forms. You live inside and among the evidence of human capability, surrounded by proof that hands guided by knowledge can transform raw materials into everything necessary for complex civilization. This transformation continues daily, unremarkably, creating the foundation for culture, community, and continuity across generations. Sleep comes easily after days filled with physical work and mental attention. Tomorrow the cycle continues. Fire rekindled, tools taken up, materials transformed slowly through practice skill. The work is never finished because there's always more to make, repair, and improve. But this endless quality makes the work sustainable rather than exhausting, a permanent rhythm rather than a temporary sprint. You wake to familiar tasks, executed with familiar skills, creating familiar objects that fill familiar needs. And in this familiarity lies both comfort and purpose, the daily work connecting you to past and future through the present moment's careful attention to craft. Tonight, we journey back nearly 3,000 years to a time when communities chose elevation over ease, building their homes and lives upon hills that still bear the scars of their earthworks. Here, where grass now grows undisturbed, people once walked familiar paths between roundhouses, tended fires against the evening chill, and watched the world unfold below them with a patience we've nearly forgotten. You're standing at the base of a hill, in what will someday be called Southern England, though no one here would recognize that name. It's a mild afternoon in late spring, perhaps 800 years, before anyone will write the year as 700 BCE. The sun hangs comfortably above the western horizon, casting everything in that peculiar golden light that makes even ordinary grass look purposeful. The hill rises before you, with the kind of steady gradient that suggests nature designed it specifically for climbing without excessive effort. Not one of those dramatic peaks, that demands mountain climbing equipment and inspirational speeches, but rather a sensible sort of elevation, the kind that makes you think, yes, this seems reasonable, rather than absolutely not. Your feet find the sheep track winding upward, worn smooth by countless hooves and paws and feet over generations. The path doesn't rush, it meanders slightly, accommodating the natural contours rather than fighting them, switching back on itself where the slope grows steeper. Hawthorn bushes cluster along the route, their white blossoms releasing a scent somewhere between almonds and honey, though perhaps more musty than either, like flowers that have been thinking deeply about becoming fruit. As you climb, the sounds from the valley below begin to soften. A dog barking at something only it can see, the rhythmic thunk of someone splitting wood, children's voices rising and falling in that universal pattern of invented games and disputed rules. These noises don't disappear entirely. They simply become part of a larger acoustic landscape that includes skylarks overhead, wind moving through grass, and the surprisingly loud buzz of a beetle passing your ear, with all the self-importance of someone late for an appointment. The hillside itself speaks volumes about patience. This isn't virgin wilderness, untouched by human hands. The grass shows evidence of grazing, cropped short in patches where sheep have worked systematically through their favorite areas. Here and there, you spot where someone has cut turfs for roofing material, leaving neat rectangular scars that will heal themselves back into continuity over the next season or two. Small paths branch off the main track, leading to berry bushes or good sitting rocks, or simply meandering in the way paths do when created by creatures who sometimes walk for the pure pleasure of walking. Halfway up, you pause not because you're winded, but because the view has started to reveal itself. The valley spreads below with that casual magnificence of landscape that existed long before anyone thought to call it scenery. A river curves through it, catching the light in silver fragments where it breaks over stones. Darker green patches mark where trees cluster in wet hollows. Lighter areas show where fields have been cleared, though calling them fields overstates the geometry involved. They're more like places where we convince the forest to take a break for a while. You can see smoke rising from several points in the valley, thin grey columns that climb upward before dispersing into invisibility. Someone's cooking, someone's keeping warm, someone's doing whatever it is that requires a controlled fire on a perfectly pleasant afternoon. The smoke moves slowly, reluctantly, like it's in no particular hurry to stop being smoke and become just part of the general air. Continuing upward, you notice how the vegetation changes with elevation. The trees, which dominated the lower slopes, have given way to scrub and then to grass, punctuated by hardy low bushes that have made peace with wind exposure. Wildflowers dot the green, small, determined bursts of yellow and purple and white, each one apparently convinced it has chosen the absolute best spot on the entire hillside. They might be right. Each seems perfectly suited to its particular patch of earth, as though flower and location had negotiated their arrangement seasons ago and found it mutually satisfactory. The hilltop, when you reach it, doesn't announce itself with drama. No sudden revelations or inspirational vistas that demand you immediately write poetry. Instead, it offers a gentle flattening, a sense that the ground has decided climbing is quite enough work for one day, and perhaps everyone should simply plateau for a bit. The wind picks up here, no longer filtered through valley features, arriving directly from whichever direction it happens to be traveling today. And here, spread across this elevated flatness, you find evidence of sustained human presence. Not massive monuments or architectural ambitions, but the practical marks of people who decided that this particular hill, this specific height, offered something worth the daily inconvenience of vertical living. Earthworks circle the hilltop in rough concentric rings, raised banks of soil and chalk, backed by ditches that serve double duty as both defensive features and extremely effective drainage. These aren't fresh constructions. Grass grows thick on the banks, and the ditches have that settled look of features that have been rained into and frozen and thawed and baked enough times to achieve a kind of permanent character. Small paths cross the earthworks at intervals, worn by feet that know exactly where the easiest passages exist. Within these protective rings, you can see the outlines of structures. Circular foundations mark where buildings stand or once stood, their posts creating perfect geometric patterns in the earth. Some show signs of recent occupation. Darker soil near central hearth positions, scattered debris of daily life, and paths worn between doorways. Others have that abandoned quality of places, waiting to be reclaimed by grass, their posts removed or rotted, leaving only the memory of walls. The light continues its slow, amber progression toward evening. Up here, away from valley obstructions, the sky feels larger, more present. Clouds move across it with stately purpose, casting shadows that race across the landscape below, darkening and lightening the patchwork of fields and forests and grasslands in constant rotation. You could watch this all day. Possibly some people do. A raven calls from somewhere above. That deep croaking commentary that ravens seem to offer on everything they observe. It's answered by another raven, or possibly the same raven from a different location, because judging raven positions by sound alone is an imperfect science at best. They're probably discussing something vitally important in raven politics, or possibly just mentioning that there's a person standing on the hilltop looking somewhat purposeless and might be worth monitoring for dropped food. The earthworks curve away in both directions, following the hill's natural contours with the kind of precision that suggests careful planning, combined with willingness to adjust plans when the ground presented opinions. In places, the banks rise higher than your head. In others, they're more modest, acknowledging where the natural slope already provides enough elevation. The ditches vary too, deep enough to make casual crossing awkward, but not so dramatically deep that maintaining them would become anyone's full-time occupation. This is Maiden Castle before Maiden Castle existed, Danebury before anyone called it Danebury. One of hundreds, possibly thousands, of similar hilltop settlements scattered across southern Britain, each one representing the same basic impulse: to live high enough to see trouble coming, close enough to water and good land to make the arrangement practical. The people who built these earthworks and raised these structures weren't making monuments to impress distant archaeologists. They were making homes. And as the sun continues its reliable journey toward the horizon, you can almost hear, or perhaps imagine hearing, the sounds of such a home waking into its evening routines. The clink of pottery, low voices discussing tomorrow's work, someone singing something wordless while working at a task that requires both hands. The small domestic symphony of people settling into that space between afternoon and night, when the day's labor eases, but darkness hasn't yet demanded fire and shelter. You've arrived at the hill fort. The real story, though, begins much earlier, with the first people who looked at this hill and thought, yes, up there, instead of definitely not. Long before anyone raised these earthworks or dug these ditches, the hills of Britain were simply hills. They rose from valleys without particular meaning beyond the practical, harder to farm than flat land, exposed to weather, requiring extra effort to access water. Sensible people, one might think, would naturally gravitate toward river valleys and coastal plains, where both resources and comfort existed in greater abundance. And yet, someone looked at this hill, this specific elevation among countless others, and made a different calculation. Perhaps it was a single family initially, or a small group seeking summer grazing for animals. Maybe they came first for flint from chalk deposits, or to gather medicinal plants that preferred well-drained slopes, or simply because their existing settlement had grown crowded enough that some individuals preferred vertical distance to horizontal proximity. The original motivation has vanished into the unrecorded past, leaving only the consequence. Someone began spending significant time on this hilltop and eventually decided to stay. This decision didn't happen suddenly. The archaeological evidence, such as it exists, suggests a gradual process spanning generations. First, perhaps temporary camps during certain seasons, Small clearings where people paused during longer journeys, found the location useful and returned. The kind of place where you might leave some firewood under an overhang, knowing you'd likely pass this way again, and finding dry fuel waiting would be convenient. Not ownership exactly, but the beginning of a relationship between people and place. The late Bronze Age slides into the early Iron Age without announcement. The people living through it noticed no particular transition. They weren't aware they were participating in historical periods that future scholars would name and debate. They simply continued doing what made sense, keeping animals, growing grain, making tools, raising children, and arguing about whose turn it was to fetch water from the spring. Life's essential negotiations remained constant, even as the specific technologies slowly evolved. But something was changing in how communities organized themselves across the landscape. Population pressure, perhaps. Climate fluctuations that made certain lowland areas less reliable. Social complexity increased to the point where groups needed more defined territories. Or possibly just the accumulated wisdom that hills offered strategic advantage worth the daily inconvenience. You could see approaching strangers when they were still distant enough to prepare either welcome or defense. Whatever the specific motivation, someone decided to make this hilltop more permanently habitable. The first structures were likely simple. Single roundhouses built where the ground was flattest, their conical thatched roofs requiring no particular innovation. The people who built them had been constructing such houses in valleys for generations. Moving the same architectural tradition uphill didn't require new building techniques, just a willingness to carry materials to a less convenient location and accept that wind exposure would test their thatching skills. These early hilltop settlers didn't arrive empty-handed from nowhere. They brought with them entire traditions of how to live, techniques for preserving food, patterns for weaving cloth, and knowledge of which plants healed and which caused interesting problems. They brought pottery styles learned from mothers and grandmothers, metalworking skills passed down through apprenticeships, and songs whose origins no one remembered, but everyone still sang while working at tedious tasks. Daily life on the hilltop would have required certain adjustments. Water, that fundamental necessity, didn't conveniently present itself on most hilltops. Springs existed in some fortunate locations, emerging where geology and elevation created the right conditions. But many hill forts depended on wells dug deep through chalk and clay, or on regular journeys down to valley sources. Hauling water uphill is exactly as enjoyable as it sounds, which explains why ancient peoples often assigned this task to whoever had least successfully argued their way out of it. Yet people persisted in their elevated living arrangements. The archaeological record shows continued occupation, expanded building, and increasingly elaborate earthworks. The advantages, whatever they were, outweighed the inconveniences. Perhaps it was safety, the ability to see trouble approaching from miles away, time to organize defense or hide valuables, or simply prepare a more convincing argument about why invading this particular hill wouldn't be worth anyone's effort. Or perhaps community itself was the attraction. Living close together within defined boundaries created social intensity impossible in dispersed valley settlements. News traveled faster. Help arrived more quickly when needed. Disputes arose more frequently too, naturally. But at least everyone knew immediately when Bronwyn's goat had escaped again and was eating through someone else's vegetable patch. There's something to be said for geographical compression of social networks. Even when occasionally you wish everyone would take their compressed network elsewhere for a few hours, the hilltop community would have developed its own rhythms distinct from valley life. Sunrise came earlier at elevation, though sunset arrived at the same time. The extra altitude just provided better views of both transitions. Weather moved through more dramatically, less filtered by trees and landforms. You felt seasons changing in your bones up here, the shift from autumn to winter arriving not as a gradual suggestion, but as an undeniable declaration when the first proper gale arrived and reminded everyone why maintaining roof thatch was actually quite important. Children born on the hilltop knew nothing different. For them, the daily climb up and down wasn't an inconvenience, but simply how one moved between home and fields, or home and forest, or home and wherever children went when they claimed to be just playing nearby before returning hours later with scraped knees and elaborate excuses. They developed the strong legs and reliable lungs that came from vertical living, and probably pitied their valley-dwelling cousins who had to walk so much farther to reach equivalent distances simply because they insisted on going around obstacles instead of over them. The first permanent inhabitants watched their hilltop settlement grow gradually, organically. A second house joined the first when another family decided elevation suited them. Then a third. Storage structures appeared, raised granaries that kept food dry and away from ground moisture, protected from rodents by careful construction, and possibly by cats who had figured out that humans storing grain inevitably attracted mice, and mice were considerably more interesting than whatever scraps humans might deliberately offer. Fences and walls began defining spaces, not the elaborate earthworks that would come later, but practical divisions between where we keep animals and where we'd prefer animals didn't go. Pathways emerged through simple repetition. People naturally walk the most efficient routes between frequent destinations, and enough feet following the same logic will eventually create a visible track requiring no formal planning. Someone, at some point, must have looked around at this growing hilltop community and thought about longer-term security. The houses and storage structures represented accumulated wealth and effort. The people themselves represented relationships and shared knowledge. Protecting both seemed increasingly worthwhile as the settlement grew more established and prosperous. The decision to build defensive earthworks likely wasn't made in a single dramatic council. More probably, it emerged through incremental consensus, discussions during shared work, observations about vulnerabilities, comparisons with other hilltop settlements people had visited or heard described. Someone might have suggested, we should really do something about the Western approach, after noticing how exposed it was, and gradually something evolved into plans for earthworks. But before those major constructions began, before the hilltop became a hill fort, in the formal sense, there was this gentler period of establishment, people learning how weather moved across their particular elevation, where the best spots for various crops existed within walking distance, which springs ran year-round and which disappeared by late summer, how to organize communal work, where to place the middens so they served sanitation without becoming immediate problems for houses downwind. They learned their hill intimately, every slope and hollow, every patch where wild garlic grew thickly, every rock outcrop that might serve some useful purpose, or at least provide decent seating when you needed to catch your breath halfway through an uphill journey while carrying something heavy. The hill became known territory, understood through seasons of constant interaction, and somewhere in these gradual processes of settlement and adjustment and accumulated knowledge, the transition occurred from people living on a hill to a community whose identity is connected to this specific elevation. The hill wasn't just a location anymore. It was becoming home. The construction of defensive earthworks around the settlement didn't happen overnight, though imagining the entire community suddenly inspired to dig ditches and raise banks all at once makes for a more dramatic story. Reality proceeded more slowly, more pragmatically, with the kind of incremental decision-making that characterizes most human enterprises that last longer than a few enthusiastic weeks. Someone likely began by marking out a line, perhaps using stakes and cord, or simply scraping a visible groove in the turf to indicate this is where we're thinking the earthwork might go. Others would have walked this proposed line, offering observations about how it interacted with natural contours, where it might need adjustment, and whether extending it slightly to include that useful spring would be worth the extra digging effort. Once the route was agreed upon, or at least agreed upon enough that work could begin while remaining disagreements continued in the background, the actual labor commenced. Digging ditches in chalk and clay with Bronze Age and early Iron Age tools was exactly as pleasant as it sounds, which is to say, not very. Antler picks worked surprisingly well for breaking up compacted earth, their natural curve providing good leverage. Shoulder blades from cattle, mounted on wooden handles, served as effective shovels. Baskets woven from willow carried away the spoil. The work organized itself according to seasons and agricultural calendars. You didn't dig ditches when fields needed planting or harvesting. Those tasks took priority. But during slower periods, when weather permitted outdoor labor and other demands eased, groups of people would spend days at the earthworks. Not glamorous work, repetitive, physically demanding, and progress measured in increments small enough to seem almost insulting given the effort expended. Yet the ditches deepened gradually. The banks rose as excavated material was piled systematically on the inner side, creating the classic hill fort profile, a ditch fronted by a rampart, the combination making the actual height difference more dramatic than either element alone. The geometry wasn't always perfect. The ditch width varied where particularly stubborn geological features resisted digging. The banks sometimes wandered slightly from their intended lines when workers encountered obstacles or simply got tired and decided this spot was close enough to the plan. Some sections of earthwork received timber reinforcement. Posts driven into the bank face provided structural support, preventing erosion and collapse. These weren't enormous timbers, just adequate poles, perhaps the size of your upper arm, spaced at intervals that experience had taught, provided sufficient strength. In some places, horizontal timbers connected the vertical posts, creating a box frame internal structure that kept everything stable, even when rain saturated the earthworks. The entrances received particular attention. You couldn't simply leave gaps in your defensive circuit. That defeated the entire purpose. Instead, builders created elaborate interned entrances where the earthworks curved inward, forcing anyone approaching to navigate a narrow passage overlooked from both sides. Some entrances featured wooden gates that could be closed at night or during emergencies. The gates themselves weren't massive fortifications. Solid wooden barriers hung on posts, secured with bars, sufficient to stop casual entry and provide warning of determined attempts. Building these earthworks required community coordination on a scale that implies considerable social organization. Someone had to manage labor allocation. Someone needed to ensure workers received food during their days at the ditches. You can't expect people to spend daylight hours moving earth without feeding them adequately. Someone tracked progress, identified sections needing attention, and coordinated the simultaneous work of dozens of individuals toward a unified end result. This level of coordination suggests leadership structures we can't directly observe from earthwork traces alone, but the earthworks themselves testify to it indirectly. You don't get several thousand feet of ditch and rampart, carefully planned and systematically executed, without people willing to follow directions and accept that their individual preferences about exactly where the ditch should go sometimes need to accommodate the larger design. The work likely proceeded in stages over years. Perhaps they started with the most vulnerable approach, establishing earthworks across the western side where the slope was gentlest. Once that section proved itself effective and manageable, they extended the circuit gradually, adding new sections as resources and labor permitted. Each generation inherited an incomplete hill fort and left it slightly more developed for their children. Children probably watched this construction with the same fascinated boredom that children bring to most adult projects, intensely interesting for brief periods, then forgotten until something dramatic happened, like someone discovering an underground spring while digging or accidentally unearthing an interesting bone that sparked debate about what animal it came from. They likely played on partially completed earthworks, sliding down newly raised banks or jumping across narrow ditch sections until adults noticed and expressed opinions about children playing on important defensive structures. The earthworks changed how the hilltop felt. Before, it had been open, continuous with the surrounding landscape. After, it became defined, inside and outside clearly delineated. The ramparts blocked certain views while emphasizing others. Wind patterns changed, the earthworks creating sheltered areas on their leeward sides. Water drainage improved dramatically, the ditches channeling rainfall away from living areas. Not every hill fort followed identical designs, each adapted to its specific topography and community needs. Some created single circuits of earthwork. Others built multiple concentric rings, adding additional defensive layers over time. Some incorporated natural features like cliff edges into their circuits, saving labor by letting geology do some defensive work. Others had to muscle through entirely with human effort because their hilltops offered no convenient natural assistance. The chalk excavated from ditches created brilliant white scars across the landscape, visible for miles, gleaming especially bright after rain. Whether this visibility was an intentional display or simply an inevitable consequence of construction methods remains unclear, but it certainly announced the hill fort's presence to anyone traveling through the region. Yes, those white earthworks proclaimed, there are people here, organized people, people who command resources and labor sufficient to rearrange significant portions of hillside. Perhaps keep this in mind when making your travel plans. Not all hill forts were primarily defensive. Some seem more focused on controlling access, less about withstanding attacks, and more about managing who came and went, collecting tolls perhaps, or simply maintaining community boundaries. The earthworks served multiple purposes: practical defense, social definition, ritual boundary, and probably several other functions we haven't imagined, because our modern contexts don't prepare us for how Iron Age communities thought about space and territory. As the earthworks took shape, the settlement within evolved too. Houses multiplied, storage structures proliferated. The internal geography organized itself with increasing definition. Areas for specific crafts, zones for animal pens, and clear pathways connecting major structures. The hill fort wasn't just enclosed, it was becoming deliberately arranged, its internal space thoughtfully allocated according to needs both practical and social. The completed earthworks, or as completed as earthworks ever become, since maintaining them required constant attention, represented monumental communal achievement. Miles of ditch and bank, thousands of hours of labor, and coordination across extended time spans, all in service of creating a defensible, defined, permanent settlement. The people who finished what earlier generations started must have felt considerable satisfaction, tempered perhaps by awareness that future generations would inherit maintenance responsibilities in perpetuity. But maintenance, like construction, could be incorporated into seasonal rhythms: spring inspections of winter damage, autumn reinforcement before storms, ongoing attention to gates and timber elements. The earthworks became part of community identity, something we built and we maintain, a physical manifestation of collective identity and shared purpose. And within these protective circuits of earth and timber, daily life continued with the kind of determined normalcy that characterizes human existence, regardless of whether one lives in a hill fort or valley, or anywhere else that humans decide to call home. Morning on the hilltop begins with smoke, thin threads rising from central hearths, climbing through smoke holes in conical thatched roofs, dispersing into the early light. The smoke moves lazily, unhurried, as though still deciding whether becoming fully awake is really necessary just yet. Someone has already revived yesterday's fire, coaxing it back to useful life with careful attention, and probably some muttering about why fires can't simply stay lit overnight without requiring human intervention. The roundhouses stand in loose clusters, their walls of wattle and daub forming circles that range from quite modest to reasonably impressive, depending on the household's size and prosperity. Thatched roofs extend well past wall lines, creating deep eaves that shed rain away from foundations. Each house faces roughly southeast, catching morning light while turning shoulders toward prevailing winds. Not a coincidence, generations of experience taught optimal orientation long before anyone thought to write it down. You emerge from one such house, stooping through the low doorway. straightening into the morning air. The temperature at this elevation carries a bite, even in summer. A reminder that you've voluntarily chosen to live where weather arrives with minimal warning. Your breath is visible briefly before dissipating. The grass around the house gleams with dew that will burn off within a few hours, but currently makes everything look freshly painted. The central space within the hill fort serves multiple functions. Open ground between houses provides areas for work that requires space and light. Hide preparation, large-scale weaving, tool making, and any craft that generates mess or smells are better conducted outdoors, where wind provides ventilation and space offers room for materials. Children appear gradually as morning progresses, emerging from houses with that rumpled appearance of people recently vertical, but not yet fully committed to wakefulness. Smoke continues rising from various hearths. Cooking smells join it, grain porridge bubbling in pottery vessels, occasional hints of something more interesting when someone's preparing something beyond standard breakfast fare. People move between houses with that purposeful morning gait, suggesting errands remembered overnight. Borrowed tools are returning. Quick conversations about shared work planned for today. Someone reminding someone else about something they've apparently forgotten despite multiple previous reminders. The animals wake with their own opinions about timing. Pigs root in their pen, making those conversational grunts that pigs offer when expressing general satisfaction with existence. A few sheep bleat from the area designated for overnight animal containment, not distressed, just mentioning they're awake in case anyone wants to know. A dog stretches extensively, then trots off on important dog business that requires checking every interesting smell around the settlement's perimeter. Water collection starts early. Several people head toward the spring or well, carrying pottery vessels or leather containers. The spring lies just outside the western earthwork, emerging from chalk at a location convenient enough that someone undoubtedly considered it a primary factor in choosing this hilltop initially. The water runs clear and cold, tasting faintly of the stone it's traveled through, emerging at a rate that's reliable even during summer drought. Inside one of the larger roundhouses, a family navigates breakfast routines with the kind of choreographed chaos that characterizes any household containing multiple generations. Grandmother stirs the porridge, adding dried fruit sparingly because winter supplies remain precious, even as spring progresses. The children crowd near the hearth, seeking warmth and food simultaneously. Their father checks tools by the doorway, selecting what he'll need for today's work in the lower fields. Their mother wraps yesterday's bread in cloth, adding it to a basket along with some cheese and dried meat. Lunch for anyone working too far from the hill fort to return midday. The crafts that sustain hill fort life happen everywhere you look. Near the eastern earthwork, someone set up a pottery station where spring clay has been carried up from the valley, worked to proper consistency, and formed into vessels waiting for firing. The work requires patience, coiling clay ropes into vessel shapes, smoothing surfaces, and adding decorative elements that please the eye while providing texture for better grip. Each vessel reflects individual choices within established traditions. This particular curve of rim, that specific pattern scratched into shoulder areas. Metalwork happens in a designated area where fire hazards can be managed. The smith works mostly bronze, though iron is increasingly common as knowledge of the trickier metal spreads. The forge requires constant attention. Temperatures must be maintained precisely, and air blown through bellows at correct intervals. Watching someone work metal is hypnotic. The heating until color indicates readiness, the hammering that shapes material through percussion, and the quenching that fixes form. Sparks fly, metal rings. Something useful emerges from careful violence and precise timing. Textile work fills the time of anyone whose other tasks permit. Spinning wool into thread happens almost unconsciously, hands working drop spindles while attention focuses elsewhere, on conversation or thought, or simply watching the world move through its day. The rhythmic twist and drop, the growing weight of spun thread around the spindle, the way muscle memory handles complexity, so consciousness can wander. Weaving happens on larger looms, with warp threads weighted with clay or stone, and weft threads pass through in patterns that create not just cloth, but identity. Colors and patterns declaring origin and status through visual language everyone understands. The fields surrounding the hill fort require daily attention. Some lie close enough that workers return for a midday meal. Others, particularly the larger cleared areas in the valley, mean longer days away from the settlement. People head out in groups, carrying tools and food, planning their labor according to season and crop and weather. Today it's weeding, endless, eternal weeding, that struggle between cultivated plants and everything else that also thinks this soil looks promising. Children old enough to be useful, but young enough to still require supervision, accompany adults to the fields. They learn through watching and helping. How to identify crop versus weed, proper hoeing technique, and the satisfaction of seeing cleared ground. They also learn patience, that agricultural virtue rivaling any other. Plants grow at their own pace. Rushing helps nothing. It's better to work steadily and sustainably than to exhaust yourself before the task is complete. Back in the hill fort, those remaining attend to different necessities. Elderly members work at tasks suited to seated positions and accumulated knowledge, fine weaving, careful tool sharpening, and food preparation that requires experience more than strength. They mind younger children too, the ones not yet useful in fields, but definitely capable of finding trouble if left unsupervised. Stories get told during these hours, knowledge transferred through narrative about how things work and why they work that way, and what happened when someone tried different approaches. Midday brings those working nearby back to the hill fort. The sun stands nearly overhead, shadows compressed to minimal presence. People seek shade where possible, under extended roof eaves, in the lee of the earthworks, or anywhere offering relief from direct exposure. They eat bread and cheese, dried fruit, and occasionally fresh vegetables when the season provides them. Water passes around, lukewarm from sitting in containers, but still welcome. The afternoon continues the morning's activities, but with increasing awareness of the approaching evening. Work progresses toward natural stopping points rather than pushing for excessive completion. Someone starts thinking about dinner preparation, assessing what's available and what would work well combined. Another person checks the animals, ensuring they've had water and planning where they'll graze tomorrow. The hill fort's elevated position means you're constantly aware of weather approaching. You see the clouds building in the west long before valley dwellers notice them. The changing light, the shift in wind direction, the particular quality of air that suggests rain's coming. All these signals arrive early at elevation, providing time to secure anything that shouldn't get wet and warn people in distant fields to finish up and return. As afternoon edges toward evening, people drift back toward the settlement. The workers from distant fields return, tired but satisfied with the day's progress. Tools get cleaned and stored. Animals return to their overnight pens. The tempo of hill fort life shifts from productive activity toward evening's slower rhythms, food preparation, small repairs, and social time, when the day's labor no longer demands full attention. Dinner preparations create new smells across the settlement. Most households eat porridge variations for efficiency, grain cooked with whatever's available to make it more interesting. But some nights call for more effort. Meat from recent hunting, vegetables from carefully tended gardens, and bread from morning's baking. The smell of cooking grain combines with wood smoke and indefinable other scents that collectively announce settlement at dinner time to anyone approaching. Children play their eternal games, variations of chase and hide and seek, and whatever else children invent when given free time and peer groups. Their voices carry across the hill fort, that particular quality of children having fun that sounds remarkably similar across all centuries. Adults half watch while attending to other tasks, alert for the shift in sound quality that suggests someone's gone from playing to actual distress. The sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, light shifting through those amber and gold tones that make everything look temporarily significant. Shadows lengthen. The air cools noticeably. People naturally gravitate toward hearths and social warmth as daylight fades toward evening's threshold. This is daily life within the earthworks. Not dramatic, not particularly memorable, but reliably human in its patterns of work and rest, effort and satisfaction, and individual actions contributing to collective survival and continuity. Standing near the hill fort's eastern rampart, you can see for miles. The landscape unfolds in layers: foreground, middle distance, and far horizon, each with its own textures and colors and qualities of light. Morning mist still clings to the lowest valley areas, making distant rivers appear as silver ribbons floating against undefined green. The view changes constantly, yet remains fundamentally familiar. The same territory observed through every season, every weather condition, and every time of day. This elevated perspective shapes how you understand the world. Down in valleys, vision terminates quickly against the next hill, the next forest stand. Your world necessarily remains local, bounded by immediate geography. But from up here, you see relationships between things, how the river connects distant areas, where forest transitions to cleared land, and the patterns of human settlement spread across available terrain. You see not just your own small territory, but the larger landscape you're part of. The valley directly below shows patchwork cultivation. Fields irregular in shape follow terrain contours, bounded by hedgerows or stone clearance piles. Some lie fallow this year, already showing signs of returning vegetation. Others bear crops at various stages of growth. The patterns make sense from above, in ways invisible from ground level. The agricultural logic of crop rotation, the careful distribution of labor across available arable land, and the balance between production and soil maintenance. Smoke rises from several points in the valley. Other settlements, smaller than the hill fort, mark where families or small kin groups maintain farmsteads. You know these people. They're connected through marriage or trade or simply proximity. They bring grain to the hill fort for storage during times of plenty. They seek refuge within the earthworks when threats materialize. They participate in seasonal festivals and major communal work projects. The threads of connection between hill fort and valley settlements create social fabric as real as any woven textile. The forest covers much of the visible landscape, interrupted by cleared areas but remaining dominant. Not the primeval wilderness of earlier millennia. Humans have been shaping these forests for generations, selectively harvesting useful wood, clearing areas for cultivation, and managing understory for preferred species. But still substantial, still wild enough that you wouldn't casually wander through alone without clear purpose and reasonable caution. Watching the forest from above, you notice its rhythms. Wind moves through treetops in visible waves, creating shifting patterns of lighter and darker green. Birds rise and settle. In autumn, the color changes progress, like a slow fire spreading across the canopy. In winter, bare branches create lacework against the sky. In spring, that almost painful bright green of new growth transforms everything. The forest lives, breathes, and changes. It's a backdrop, a resource, and a neighbor simultaneously. The river curves through the valley in that confident, meandering way rivers develop over geological time. From up here, you can see how it works, where it runs swift over stones, where it slows into deeper pools, and where spring floods extend beyond normal banks into temporary wetlands. The river provides water, fish, transportation, natural boundaries, and countless other services to everyone living within its watershed. Following its course with your eyes, you can trace it upstream toward hills where it begins, downstream toward wherever it eventually flows, probably into a larger river, though geography beyond immediate experience remains somewhat theoretical. Other hill forts punctuate distant elevations. small bumps on the horizon that regular observation has taught you to interpret. There's Danebury, there's Maiden Castle, and there's another whose name you know through travel and trade connections. Each holds its own community, maintains its own earthworks, and pursues the same basic strategies of elevated living for safety and status. Sometimes you see their signal fires at night. Messages passed hill to hill, faster than any runner could carry news. Sometimes travelers arrive with information about their harvests, their leaders, and their current challenges. The sky dominates from this elevation. Not filtered through valley features or constrained by surrounding hills, it extends in every direction to the horizon. You become intimately familiar with cloud formations and their implications for coming weather. Those grey masses building in the west mean rain is approaching. That particular quality of mackerel-scale clouds suggests unsettled conditions continuing. Clear skies can be deceptive. Sometimes the clearest nights bring killing frosts. Watching weather systems move across the landscape provides entertainment and practical information simultaneously. You see the rain curtains dragging across distant hills, silver-grey veils connecting cloud to ground. You watch storms march through with parade ground precision, their fronts marked by abrupt changes in wind and light. You witness the light shows of summer thunderstorms, lightning brightening valleys miles away, thunder arriving seconds later like an afterthought. At night, the view transforms. Valley settlements marked by firelight and hearth glow. The river catches moonlight, becoming a bright pathway through darkness. Stars populate the sky in numbers almost overwhelming. No light pollution reduces their brilliance. The Milky Way stretches overhead like a river of light, its banks populated by constellations your grandparents taught you, each one connected to stories that explained or entertained or warned, depending on the narrative. The moon's phases become familiar acquaintances. New moon means darker nights, better for activities best conducted with minimal visibility, though those activities presumably have legitimate purposes. A full moon transforms night into something almost bright enough for outdoor work if necessary. The moonlight on dew-covered grass creates a magical landscape, every blade outlined in silver. You could watch this for hours, and probably sometimes do when sleep proves elusive, or the night feels too beautiful to waste on unconsciousness. Seasonal changes announce themselves visibly from elevation. You see autumn progress across the landscape as leaves turn and fall. Winter's snow arrives first on distant mountains, then creeps downward through elevations like an advancing tide. Spring green starts in protected valleys before climbing to hilltops. Summer's fullness comes last to the heights, as though elevation requires extra convincing that yes, the growing season has actually begun. Bird migrations pass through. Vast flocks of geese heading north in spring and south in autumn, their V formations and constant calling announcing their passage hours before they arrive. Smaller birds are moving in waves too subtle for valley dwellers to notice, but obvious from up here, where you can see the forest canopy suddenly fill with activity. The migrations remind you that the world extends far beyond the visible horizon, that these birds travel between distant territories you can only imagine. The moon itself becomes a companion of sorts. You watch it rise over familiar landmarks, its exact rising point shifting gradually through its monthly cycle. You note where it sets, which hills it illuminates most strongly, and how its light transforms known landscapes into something slightly mysterious. The full moon rising on midsummer night, huge and amber on the horizon, creates a sight that remains memorable even after countless repetitions. From this elevation, you witness things valley dwellers miss. The way morning mist burns off from top downward, revealing landscape in strips like someone drawing back curtains. The shadows that mountains cast across valleys during low sun, darkness advancing and retreating with daily precision. The specific quality of light just before sunset that makes everything glow from within, as though the landscape itself has decided to briefly illuminate for some private celebration. Sometimes you simply stand and watch, not from duty or necessity, but because the view satisfies something fundamental. The sense of place, of being connected to landscape and community simultaneously. The knowledge that this view has been observed by countless others who stood where you stand now, who saw the same hills and rivers, though details changed, and who found similar satisfaction in elevation's perspective. The view from above shapes identity. Your hill fort people, elevated people, people who see far and understand territory in ways valley dwellers don't. Not superior exactly, just different. Your position creates different awareness, different concerns, and different relationships with space and distance, and the larger patterns of land and weather. And as light fades and the world softens toward evening, the view remains, constant, changing, always worth attention. Autumn arrives with that particular slant of light that seems designed specifically to make you nostalgic for summer before it's even properly gone. The sun is tracking lower each day, shadows are lengthening, and there is that golden quality to afternoon illumination that photographers centuries from now will spend lifetimes trying to capture. Harvest occupies everyone's attention, the culmination of the year's agricultural effort, make or break time for winter stores. The grain fields around the hill fort turn shades of amber and gold. Barley ripens first, its heads heavy and nodding in the wind. Emmer wheat follows, standing in dense patches where spring planting took hold successfully. The work of cutting grain is relentless. Teams moving through fields with sickles, cutting close to the ground and laying stalks in organized rows for drying. Your back aches. Your hands develop calluses that will fade over winter, only to return next harvest. But the work continues because it must. You harvest when the crop is ready, not when you feel like it. Children help gather the cut grain into sheaves, binding them with twisted straw. They work alongside adults, learning the rhythm of harvest labor, understanding through direct experience why winter's comfort depends on autumn's effort. The older children can be trusted with tools. The younger ones mainly try not to disrupt the work while feeling important about their contributions. Once the grain is cut and dried, threshing begins. Inside the hill fort, on flat, hard ground, people beat the dried stalks with flails, separating grain from chaff. The work is repetitive, dusty, and oddly satisfying. The rhythmic thump of flails, the gradual accumulation of grain, and the visible progress toward winter security. Later, when wind permits, someone tosses the threshed grain high, letting air carry away the lighter chaff, while heavier grain falls back to collecting baskets. This winnowing requires patience and favorable conditions, but you've developed both through necessity. The grain gets stored in raised granaries, scattered throughout the hill fort, wooden structures elevated on posts to keep contents dry and away from rodents. Some grain goes into sealed pottery vessels, packed tight and covered with clay sealant. A few communities have begun digging grain storage pits, clay-lined holes that create anaerobic conditions, preserving contents when properly sealed. The diversity of storage methods hedges bets. If one method fails, others might succeed, ensuring some food survives to spring. Apples ripen in the valley orchards, such as they are. These aren't carefully cultivated trees producing uniform fruit, but half-wild things that someone once decided to protect and occasionally prune, resulting in small, tart apples suitable for immediate eating or drying for winter. Children climb the trees, shaking branches, gathering fallen fruit into baskets. Some apples get crushed for cider, the juice left to ferment in pottery vessels, creating something stronger than water that will last through winter without spoiling. The forest offers its own harvest. Hazelnuts require careful gathering before squirrels claim them all, a race you're not always confident of winning. Mushrooms appear after autumn rains, though distinguishing edible from poisonous requires knowledge transferred carefully from experienced to novice. Berries ripen at different times, Blackberries are thorny but abundant. Elderberries require cooking, and sloes are too bitter to eat raw but useful once processed. Animals fatten on autumn abundance. The pigs root through forests, eating acorns and beech mast, and whatever else they discover, putting on weight that translates to winter food. Sheep graze the stubble fields after harvest, cleaning up dropped grain while fertilizing for next year. Cattle grow sleek on late grass, still growing while temperatures permit. The flocks and herds represent walking food reserves. Most will be slaughtered before winter, their meat preserved through smoking, salting, or drying. The autumn slaughter is a practical necessity tinged with celebration. You can't feed all animals through winter. Fodder stores won't stretch that far. So you select which breeding animals to keep and which to cull, then spend several intense days processing meat. Blood gets saved for sausages, hides go to the tanner, bones boil into soup stock or get worked into tools. Nothing is wasted. The animals provide too much value to discard any useful portion. Winter comes gradually, then suddenly. First frosts arrive on clear nights, turning grass white and killing remaining garden plants. The last leaves fall from deciduous trees, leaving skeletal branches against grey skies. Days shorten noticeably, sunrise coming later, sunset arriving earlier, and darkness claiming increasingly larger portions of each 24-hour cycle. The hill fort turns inward during winter. People spend more time inside roundhouses, gathered near hearths, conducting indoor work while weather prevents outdoor labor. It's the season for maintenance and craft, mending tools, repairing damaged items, and creating new goods that summer's busyness left no time for. The work continues, just different work, adapted to the season and conditions. Snow transforms the landscape when it arrives. The hill fort's earthworks stand out dramatically against white ground, dark banks rising from frozen pale fields. Tracks become visible, every animal movement recorded in snow, creating patterns that reveal otherwise hidden wildlife activity. The children naturally find snow an excellent addition to their play options, though adults suggest perhaps sliding down the earthworks could wait until the defensive structures aren't quite so slippery. Midwinter brings the year's longest darkness. The sun barely climbs above southern hills before beginning its descent again. Days feel compressed, brief glimpses of light, bookended by extensive darkness. People mark the solstice with particular attention. This is the turning point, the moment when days stop shortening and begin, almost imperceptibly, to lengthen again. The celebration acknowledges survival thus far and hopes for spring's return. Spring arrives hesitantly, unconvincingly at first. A few warmer days, followed by bitter cold returns. But gradually, the trend establishes itself. Temperatures rise, daylight extends, and the world begins its annual resurrection. Snowdrops appear in sheltered areas, then primroses, then a succession of flowers marking spring's reliable progression. Birds return from wherever they spent winter. Their songs create a morning chorus that's been absent for months. Lambs arrive, the sheep giving birth in the muddy, churned ground where they've been kept through winter, producing the next generation with their typical enthusiasm for creating new life in decidedly unpleasant conditions. The lambs make everyone slightly happier. Something about their bouncing energy and absolute conviction that climbing things will improve any situation. Fields need preparing for planting. Teams move through with ards, simple plows pulled by cattle, breaking up soil, creating furrows for seed. The work tests both human and animal strength, battling winter-compacted earth, arguing with roots and stones, and proceeding slowly across acreage that needs covering before planting season passes. Behind the plow teams come the seed sowers, scattering grain in patterns learned through generations, achieving coverage that looks random but actually reflects careful distribution. Spring also brings renewal of valley activities, repairs to winter damage, fences mended, structures weatherproofed, paths cleared of debris. The animals go out to graze, leaving winter pens behind, spreading across the landscape like released prisoners joyfully embracing freedom. People can work outdoors again without fighting cold and can extend their days beyond the brief midwinter light. Summer arrives with its own intensity. Long days allow extended work periods. The sun rises early and sets late, providing light for all the tasks that winter postponed and spring couldn't accommodate. Gardens flourish in valley plots. Vegetables and herbs grow rapidly, requiring constant attention to watering and weeding and protection from animals who also appreciate fresh greens. The crops in fields grow steadily toward harvest. You watch them daily, monitoring progress, noting any problems, pulling persistent weeds, and scaring birds from areas where they've decided the grain is ready for eating, despite your opinions to the contrary. The grain's growing cycle becomes your cycle, its needs dictating your schedule, its vulnerability to weather creating constant low-level anxiety about hail or excessive rain or drought. Midsummer brings the year's longest day, the counterpoint to midwinter. The celebration feels different, not relief at survival, but satisfaction with abundance, gratitude for warmth and light, and growing things. The Hillfort community gathers for shared food and drink, entertainment, and socializing. The kind of communal celebration that reinforces bonds and reminds everyone why living together in this elevated place makes sense despite the inconveniences. And then the year curves back toward autumn, beginning the cycle again. The seasons turn with reliable rhythm, planting and growing, harvest and preservation, winter survival and spring renewal, and the endless repetition that characterizes agricultural life. Each year resembles the previous, yet brings its own variations: a late frost, an early harvest, summer drought or excessive rain. The details change while the pattern persists. Inside the roundhouse, your grandmother shapes clay with practiced hands. The pottery vessel emerges gradually from the coiled ropes she builds up layer by layer, smoothing the joins, maintaining the curve she's carrying in her mind. She's been making pots longer than you've been alive, longer than your mother's been alive, and the knowledge sits in her fingers like muscle memory. This particular vessel will hold grain through winter, its rim carefully finished to accept a lid that will seal contents against moisture and pests. The clay came from the valley, dug from a deposit your community has used for generations. Not just any clay. This specific source, worked by countless potters, produces vessels that survive firing and daily use. The preparation alone required days. Digging, transporting uphill, removing stones and organic material, and adding temper to prevent cracking. Then the clay aged, allowing it to achieve proper consistency, becoming workable through processes partly understood and partly mysterious. Near the doorway, your uncle works on a new spear shaft. The ash wood was selected months ago, chosen for grain pattern and lack of knots, and cut during the correct moon phase. Not that everyone agrees moon phases matter, but tradition suggests they do. And why risk it? The wood has been drying since then, losing moisture that would otherwise cause warping. Now he shapes it with careful scraping, using bronze tools to achieve the gradual taper that balances strength with throwing efficiency. The metalwork happens at the forge area, where temperatures can be managed safely. Bronze casting requires precise heat control, correct alloy ratios, and careful handling of molten metal that doesn't forgive careless attention. The smith melts old, broken items along with new ingots, pouring liquid metal into shaped molds, creating tool heads and decorative pieces, and whatever else the community needs. Each casting represents multiple skills: metalworking, obviously, but also mold making, design sense, and understanding of how cooled metal will behave compared to its molten state. Iron remains trickier. It requires higher temperatures, different techniques, and more uncertainty about final results. But iron tools keep edges better than bronze, and iron is becoming increasingly available through trade networks stretching across the continent. The Smith experiments, learns through trial and expensive errors, and gradually masters the temperamental material. Each successful iron blade or tool tip represents a minor victory against a metal that seems actively determined to make things difficult. Textile work fills available time constantly. Wool processing begins with shearing, wrestling sheep into cooperation, removing their fleece in sections, and trying not to accidentally nick the overly mobile animal beneath all that wool. The fleeces get cleaned, removing the natural lanolin and accumulated dirt. Then comes carding, aligning the fibers so they'll spin smoothly. And finally, spinning itself, that meditative process of drafting and twisting wool into threads strong enough for weaving. The spinning happens everywhere, while walking between locations, while chatting with neighbors, while supervising children, while resting between other tasks. The drop spindle twirls, the thread lengthens, and gradually enough thread accumulates for weaving. The constant low-level productivity of spinning means thread appears almost magically, as though created by the ambient activity of daily life, rather than deliberate focused work. Weaving transforms thread into cloth through that clever manipulation of warp and weft that seems simple once understood, but required remarkable innovation to invent initially. The vertical looms stand near walls where light is good, their warp threads weighted with clay or stone, creating tension that allows weft threads to pass through in patterns of over-under that create fabric. The weaver's hands move steadily, selecting heddles, passing the weft, beating it into place with the sword beater, and building cloth from bottom to top in slow, steady accretion. The patterns woven into cloth carry meaning. Certain color combinations indicate specific family lines. Particular weave structures mark different communities. The plaids and checks that will eventually become associated with Celtic peoples are already emerging in these Iron Age textiles, though no one here would recognize the term Celtic or understand why future peoples will find these patterns so emblematic. Leatherwork transforms animal hides into useful items through processes that smell exactly as awful as you'd expect, scraping the flesh side, treating with tannins from oak bark or other plant sources, stretching and drying, and softening the resulting leather until it becomes supple enough for shoes or bags or clothing. The tanner occupies a workspace diplomatically positioned downwind from most living areas, their valuable skills insufficient to overcome the aromatic challenges of their profession. Woodworking creates everything from house posts to intricate carved items. The carpenter understands how different woods behave: oak for strength and weather resistance, ash for flexibility, willow for baskets, and alder for water-resistant applications. Splitting logs along their grain, shaping pieces with axes and adzes and gouges, and joining sections through clever carpentry that uses no metal fasteners, just precision fitting and wooden pegs, and occasionally hide glue when extra strength matters. The basket weaver works willow withies into vessels and containers of every size and purpose. The material grows along streams, is harvested annually, and is sorted by thickness and flexibility. The weaving itself looks deceptively simple, strips passing over and under each other in regular patterns, but achieving consistent results requires practice and attention. Baskets carry everything, store everything, and organize life's accumulated possessions and daily necessities. Food preservation occupies significant attention and craft knowledge. Smoking meat requires the right wood, nothing resinous that would impart unpleasant flavors, nothing that burns too hot or too fast. The smoking takes days, with the meat hanging in specially constructed buildings where smoke can circulate properly, gradually dehydrating and flavoring simultaneously. Salt preserves through different mechanisms, drawing out moisture and creating a hostile environment for spoilage organisms. The dried, salted meat will last months, becoming progressively tougher but remaining edible. Pickling preserves vegetables in pottery vessels, the vegetables packed with salt or submerged in brine, creating conditions where beneficial fermentation can occur while preventing rot. The resulting pickles provide vitamins through winter when fresh vegetables don't exist. They also provide strong flavors that make monotonous winter diets more interesting, though interesting is perhaps generous, given how salty and sour preserved vegetables become. The medicinal knowledge sits primarily with elders who've learned through apprenticeship and experience. Which plants reduce fever? Which helps infected wounds? Which ease childbirth or stomach complaints or headaches? This knowledge represents community survival resources as important as food stores. Knowing how to address common ailments without access to modern medicine, working with what grows locally or can be preserved for later use. Ritual items receive particular attention and care. The pottery used for important occasions is decorated with special patterns. The bronze pieces that see only ceremonial use. The textiles are woven specifically for significant life transitions, births, marriages, and deaths. These items carry meaning beyond their material worth, connecting present community to past tradition and future continuation. Every craft represents accumulated knowledge. Generations of people learning through doing, refining techniques, discovering better approaches, and teaching the next generation who will continue the evolution. The crafts are living traditions, constantly adapting while maintaining core practices. Your grandmother makes pots slightly differently than her grandmother did, incorporating improvements learned through experience while respecting fundamental techniques proven reliable across generations. The teaching happens through observation and participation rather than formal instruction. Children watch adults working, gradually take on helper roles, and eventually attempt the craft themselves under supervision. Mistakes happen. Cracked pots, broken tools, cloth woven too loosely. But mistakes teach, and patient correction guides developing skills toward competence and eventually mastery. Within the hill fort, these crafts create self-sufficiency. The community produces most of what it needs through internal labor. Trade brings in items that can't be made locally. Specific types of stone for tools, metals, salt, perhaps decorated pottery or luxury goods. But the daily necessities come from community effort, from hands working materials into useful forms, and from knowledge applied to resources through patient, skilled attention. And as evening settles and work tools get set aside, the day's productivity sits visible in completed and partial projects, evidence of human capacity to transform raw materials into civilization's basic components through nothing more than knowledge, skill, and persistent application of both. The hilltop holds something beyond strategic advantage or practical convenience. Stand here as the sun sets, wind moving through grass, the valley darkening below while the elevated ground still catches the last light, and you feel it. That sense of being closer to whatever forces govern existence. Not a specific doctrine or formal religion, but an ambient awareness that this place sits at a threshold between ordinary and other. The earthworks themselves might function as more than defense. Their massive curves encircle the settlement, creating a defined boundary between inside and outside, known and unknown, community space, and everything else. Walking the circuit of the banks, you're tracing a line that's both physical and conceptual. This is us, that is other, and this earth and timber mark the distinction. Water sources receive particular attention. The spring emerging from chalk below the western earthwork, that reliable, cold, clear flow, surely represents some gift or presence worth acknowledging. People leave offerings occasionally, small items placed near the spring's emergence. Nothing valuable exactly, just tokens suggesting gratitude or hope or simple recognition that this water makes life possible. The offerings disappear eventually, taken by weather or animals, or perhaps by whatever presence might appreciate such gestures. Certain locations within the hill fort feel distinct, the highest point, where you can see farthest in all directions, a particular section of earthwork that catches morning sun just so. The ancient oak standing near the eastern entrance, gnarled and hollow, but still producing leaves each spring, is clearly old enough to have witnessed the hill fort's entire existence. People naturally gravitate to these places for significant moments, important decisions, personal transitions, and times when you need to feel connected to something larger than immediate concerns. The seasonal celebrations acknowledge relationships between community and cosmic patterns. Midwinter's marking of the sun's return is recognition that darkness doesn't continue forever, that the pattern holds, and that spring will come again because it always has. The festival involves fire, humanity's controlled fragment of the sun's warmth, light against darkness, and heat against winter's cold. The communal gathering around flames, sharing food and drink, singing songs whose words matter less than the act of singing together. Midsummer celebrates opposite abundance, long light, growing crops, warmth, and plenty after winter's scarcity. The festivities feel different, less about survival and more about gratitude, less anxious and more celebratory. People stay up through the short night, watching the sun barely dip below northern horizons before returning. That magical time when darkness never quite arrives, and the world exists in extended twilight. The harvest celebrations acknowledge successful completion of the agricultural year. The gathered grain represents collective effort, favorable weather, and successful navigation of countless potential disasters. Thanksgiving isn't directed at specific deities necessarily. It's more a general acknowledgement that things worked out, that cooperation between human effort and natural forces produced abundance sufficient for survival. Birth brings its own rituals. The newborn child, fresh from whatever mystery creates new life, receives an introduction to community and place, perhaps a marking with water from the sacred spring, perhaps carrying the baby around the settlement's perimeter, formally including them within the earthwork's protection, perhaps just the gathered presence of extended family and neighbors, their witness creating social reality. This new person exists, belongs, and matters. Death requires different acknowledgements. The body must be addressed, sometimes burial, sometimes cremation, practices varying by family tradition and community custom. But beyond physical disposal, the transition from living to dead creates social adjustment needs. The person who existed yesterday no longer exists today, except in memory and influence and absence. The funeral rites help the community process this change, mark the transition, and acknowledge both loss and continuation. The ancestors remain present in memory and reference. Grandmother said, or in my father's time, or according to the old stories. These invocations connect present decisions to past wisdom and suggest that those who came before still influence through their transmitted knowledge and observed examples. The ancestors aren't necessarily supernatural presences, just the dead who remain alive through continued influence on the living. Special objects carry significance beyond their material nature. The bronze torque passed down through family lines, worn on important occasions, connecting the current wearer to previous generations who wore the same piece. The carved wooden figure kept near the hearth, representing something, protection perhaps, good fortune, connection to specific ancestors or events. The exact meaning matters less than the consistent presence and the care with which it's treated. Dreams and visions sometimes receive significant attention. Someone dreams of disaster and interprets it as a warning. Someone has a vision during a fever and finds meaning in the images. Not everyone believes such experiences carry reliable information, but neither can they be entirely dismissed. The boundary between imagination and genuine spiritual communication remains unclear enough that caution suggests taking such experiences seriously. The natural world presents spiritual dimensions. Trees that survive lightning strikes or grow in improbable locations suggest some protection or significance. Birds that behave unusually might carry messages. Weather patterns that benefit or harm crops reflect forces beyond human control, but possibly not beyond human influence, through proper acknowledgement and offerings. The hilltop position itself facilitates certain experiences. Clear nights reveal stars in overwhelming numbers, the Milky Way creating that river of light overhead, and the visible cosmos suggesting scales beyond human concerns. Storm watching from elevation provides perspectives on power. The lightning, the wind, and the rain curtains moving across the landscape with indifferent majesty. These observations naturally prompt questions about existence, purpose, and humanity's place within larger patterns. No formal priesthood appears to exist, no dedicated religious specialists. Instead, knowledge of appropriate practices and significant rituals is distributed through the community, held by elders, passed through family lines, and maintained through practice and teaching. Everyone participates in spiritual life because spiritual life is simply woven into ordinary existence, not separate sacred activities, but acknowledged dimensions of daily experience. The earth itself holds significance. This particular hillside, shaped by human effort into a defensible settlement, represents a sustained relationship between people and place. Multiple generations have lived here, died here, and shaped the landscape through their presence. The ground contains their work, the earthworks they raised, the post holes from their structures, and the middens of their daily living. The physical landscape is also a cultural landscape, saturated with human history and meaning. Walking the earthworks at twilight, you can imagine the accumulated presence of everyone who walked here before. Not ghosts exactly, just the sense of continuity, of being one more person in a long succession of people who stood in this same place, looked at this same view, and thought similar thoughts about life and death, and community and existence. The feeling is neither oppressive nor celebratory, simply connecting, grounding, a reminder that you're part of something larger and longer than your individual span. The elevated ground offers perspective in multiple senses. Physical elevation provides literal long-distance vision, but perhaps also metaphorical elevation, the sense of being slightly removed from valley immediacy, able to observe patterns and relationships invisible from ground level. Not superiority exactly, but different positioning that enables different understanding. And as night fully arrives, stars emerging in their seasonal patterns, the hill fort settling into darkness punctuated by hearth fires, the spiritual dimension remains present without requiring explicit acknowledgement, simply part of how the world is, how existence feels, how meaning emerges from the intersection of place and community and human consciousness, attending to both. The hill fort doesn't end dramatically. No single catastrophic event marks its abandonment, no invasion or fire or disaster that creates clear historical punctuation. Instead, the ending comes gradually, almost imperceptibly, like light fading at day's end. You don't notice each incremental darkening, only eventually that what was bright has become dim. The first signs might simply be subtle shifts in maintenance. The earthworks still stand, but perhaps minor erosion goes unrepaired. A section of palisade that falls during winter storms doesn't get immediately replaced. Small gaps that would have been promptly addressed in earlier generations now linger, becoming permanent features through persistent neglect. Not dramatic degradation, just the slow entropy that affects anything no longer receiving constant attention. Houses remain occupied, but perhaps not all of them. Some families move to valley settlements, finding the daily inconvenience of hilltop living no longer justified by whatever advantages it once provided. Their roundhouses stand empty for a season, then two, then eventually long enough that roof thatch fails and walls begin their slow collapse back into earth. The structures don't disappear immediately. They fade over years, becoming first old house, and then where that house used to be, and eventually just slightly irregular ground where grass grows particularly thick. The reasons for gradual abandonment likely multiplied, rather than arriving as a single cause. Perhaps political situations stabilized enough that defensive positions seemed less necessary. Perhaps trade patterns shifted, making other locations more economically viable. Perhaps population pressures eased, reducing the need for densely packed hill fort communities. Perhaps climate fluctuated, making elevated exposure less tolerable. Probably all these factors combined, creating cumulative pressure toward valley settlement. The younger generations might have been the first to leave. Young families chose to establish households in valley locations where fields were closer, water more accessible, and daily living less exposed to weather extremes. The elders remained on the hilltop, attached through a lifetime's accumulated connection, unwilling to abandon the home they'd known for decades. Their children visited regularly initially, then less frequently, then mainly for significant occasions, then eventually not at all after the old ones died. The grain storage facilities remained longest, perhaps. The raised granaries were still useful even as living spaces declined. Valley farmers continued to store grain on the hilltop, where elevation and air circulation provided excellent preservation conditions. The earthworks are still valuable as boundaries, even without a permanent population to defend. The hilltop transitioned from settlement to storage facility to occasional gathering place to eventually just that old hill fort that everyone knew about but no one actively used. Vegetation begins reclaiming cleared areas. Fast-growing species first. Brambles and young trees colonizing spaces no longer maintained. Paths fade where feet no longer walk them regularly. The carefully managed landscape of active settlement gradually reverts toward wildness, though wild is relative. Everything here has been shaped by human presence for so long that even abandonment carries cultural weight. The Bronze and Iron Age communities didn't disappear, they just reorganized. Valley settlements grew as hill forts declined. The same families, the same traditions, similar lifestyles, just different geographical arrangements. The fundamental patterns of agriculture, craftwork, and social organization, these continued. The specific choice to live, elevated, diminished without eliminating the people making those choices. Roman conquest eventually arrived, bringing different organizational principles. Not everywhere simultaneously, the Romans expanded gradually across Britain, their influence rippling outward from initial invasion points. Some hill forts saw late reoccupation during periods of resistance. Others had been long abandoned before Roman forces reached their regions. The Romans themselves occasionally reused hill fort earthworks for military purposes, appreciating the strategic positions, even if they preferred different architectural approaches. The earthworks survived abandonment surprisingly well. The massive banks and ditches, once established, required active effort to eliminate. Nature could soften them, grass could cover them, but the basic shapes persisted. Trees grew on the banks, their roots eventually disrupting the carefully packed earth. Erosion carved gullies through sections where water concentrated. But centuries after abandonment, the basic circuit remained visible, not as dramatic as when freshly constructed, but still clearly artificial, still obviously intentional earthworks. Artifacts scattered across the site told fragments of a story to anyone interested in reading. Broken pottery, lost tools, fragments of worked bone, and the occasional corroded metal item. Each piece represents some moment of daily life, someone cooking, working, repairing, and leaving physical evidence that would outlast all memory of the specific person and specific moment. The artifacts didn't explain the hill fort's history, but confirmed human presence, suggested activities, and hinted at the settlement that had been. Successive generations interpreted the ruins according to their own frameworks. Medieval peoples, encountering the earthworks, created stories about giants or ancient kings or magical beings, trying to explain constructions whose origins had faded from memory. The massive earthworks seemed to demand explanations involving superhuman builders. Regular humans, doing patient systematic work over generations, felt insufficient to account for the impressive remains. Local place names sometimes preserved fragments of memory. The old Fort Hill and the earthwork location are names that acknowledge the artificial nature of features without explaining their purpose or builders. Sometimes names reference supposed supernatural occupants, fairy forts, dragon hills, imagination filling the gaps left by lost history. Agricultural work continued around the hill forts. Farmers plowed fields right up to earthwork bases, incorporated the flat protected areas within ramparts into their field systems, and occasionally complained about ancient ditches disrupting drainage patterns. The hill forts became landscape features to accommodate and work around obstacles and resources simultaneously. The grass covered everything gradually. The exposed chalk that had gleamed white when ditches were fresh disappeared under vegetation. The defined edges of earthworks softened as centuries of plant growth, death and decay accumulated layers of soil. The dramatic visibility faded to subtle prominence, still noticeable to observant eyes, but no longer the dramatic scarring of the landscape that characterized active construction. Animals used the hill forts as they used any elevated terrain. Rabbits burrowed into convenient earthwork banks. Sheep grazed the grass-covered ramparts. Badgers established sets in protected locations. The non-human life didn't care about history or significance. It just evaluated whether the location offered food, shelter, or other resources worth occupying. Storms and erosion worked slowly but persistently. Each winter's freeze-thaw cycle slightly shifted Earth. Each spring's heavy rain carved a bit more deeply into exposed areas. Each summer's drought cracked and settled previously stable sections. The changes accumulated almost imperceptibly, but over centuries added to substantial degradation of original profiles. Yet the essential forms persisted. The circuits of bank and ditch, the flattened hilltops, and the entranceways. Resilient despite centuries of neglect, protected partly by their own massive scale, partly by grass that held soil in place, and partly by simple remoteness from areas where humans actively worked to reshape the landscape. The fading wasn't loss exactly, more like transformation. The hill fort as an active settlement ended, but the hill fort as a landscape feature, as an archaeological site, as a location carrying accumulated meaning through multiple historical periods. These continued, evolved, and became something different than the original, but not necessarily lesser. The layers of time added their own significance. And slowly, very slowly, the hilltop released its human overlay, returning toward that elevated grassland that existed before anyone thought to build earthworks, that will exist long after current concerns fade into similar obscurity. Not erasing what happened here, the human presence remains readable in every curve of earthwork, every artifact fragment, but incorporating it, making it part of the hill's biography, rather than its entire identity. You're standing on the same hill, though calling it the same requires considerable generosity, given how thoroughly everything has changed. The earthworks still curve across the hilltop, grass-covered now, softened by 2 millennia of weather and plant growth, but unmistakably artificial. Walking the circuit, you follow the same basic path that Iron Age feet once traveled, though the view has transformed beyond any recognition they'd manage. The valley below holds villages, roads, and cultivated fields, arranged in geometric precision that would astonish ancient farmers. Cars move along paved routes, their speed and noise fundamentally foreign to any previous century's experience. Power lines cut through the landscape, telephone poles march in orderly rows, and somewhere in the distance, you can hear the constant low hum of modern civilization's ambient soundtrack. But the hill itself remembers. The earthworks hold their positions with stubborn persistence, maintained now not through communal labor, but through conservation efforts and archaeological interest. The profiles have softened considerably. The ditches filled partially with erosion, the banks settled and spread, and the vertical differentiation diminished. But the basic circuit remains readable, the entrances still identifiable, and the overall layout clear to anyone who knows what to look for. Archaeological excavations have occasionally pierced the grass, revealing layers of occupation, Post holes mark where roundhouses stood, their spacing and distribution suggesting settlement organization. Midden areas yield pottery fragments, animal bones, seeds, and pollen that testify to ancient diet and environment. Metal detector surveys locate iron tools, bronze ornaments, and coins from later reoccupations. Each discovery adds detail to understanding, though the picture remains fragmentary at best. The modern landscape provides strange juxtapositions. A Bronze Age burial mound stands adjacent to a transmission tower. Roman coins turn up in the same excavation layers as Iron Age pottery. Medieval ridge and furrow ploughing cuts across earlier earthworks. The layers of time compress visibly, all the accumulated human presence existing simultaneously in the archaeological record, if not in living memory. Walking these grass-covered banks, you can still appreciate the scale of achievement. The miles of earthwork represent millions of hours of labor, digging, carrying, piling, and maintaining. The coordination required, the sustained effort across generations, and the vision of creating something that outlasted any individual lifetime. The people who built this are millennia gone, their names forgotten, their specific lives unknown, but their collective accomplishment still shapes the landscape. The view from the hilltop, while thoroughly modern, still offers that elevated perspective. You see farther than valley dwellers, watch weather approaching across visible distance, and observe the relationships between geographic features. The strategic advantages that made this location attractive 3,000 years ago remain inherent in the topography, even though strategic considerations have evolved beyond recognition. Other hill forts dot the British landscape, hundreds of them varying in size and complexity and preservation state. Some are dramatic and obvious, their earthworks still imposing. Others have faded to barely detectable crop marks, visible only from the air during specific seasons. Some have been destroyed by development, quarrying, and agriculture. Some remain remarkably preserved, protected by their remoteness or difficult terrain or deliberate conservation efforts. Together, they represent a chapter of British prehistory, the period when elevated settlement made sense for sufficient numbers of communities that the landscape became dotted with these earthwork enclosures. The reasons varied by location and time, but the overall pattern suggests widespread adoption of similar strategies for similar perceived needs. Modern visitors bring their own interpretations. Some see primarily military installations, focusing on defensive aspects. Others emphasize social and economic functions, trade centers, community gathering places, and symbols of territorial control. Still others highlight ritual and spiritual dimensions, elevated places connecting earth and sky, boundary markers between mundane and sacred. Probably all these interpretations hold partial truth, and probably none captures the full complexity of what these places meant to their builders and occupants. The grass continues its patient work of covering and preserving. The best protection these earthworks have received has been simple neglect, abandoned early enough that they escaped later development, remote enough that agriculture didn't level them, and undramatic enough that treasure hunters mostly ignored them. Just grass-covered hills, interesting to specialists, but invisible to most people rushing past on roads that connect more compelling destinations. Some hill forts have become recreational sites, public parks where families picnic on ancient earthworks. Children run up and down banks without knowing their significance, and dogs chase balls across flattened interior spaces where roundhouses once stood. The democratization of these spaces seems appropriate somehow, returned to communal use even if the specific community has changed beyond all recognition. Educational programs bring school groups to walk the earthworks, touch pottery fragments, and imagine life without electricity or running water or any modern convenience. The children listen politely, maybe absorb some information, and probably mainly remember that walking up hills is tiring, and ancient people apparently didn't mind being uncomfortable, which seems strange. But perhaps something settles into memory, the scale of the earthworks, the concept of people living here long ago, the persistence of human presence across incomprehensible time spans. The night sky above the hill forts remains closer to what ancient viewers saw than almost any other aspect of the experience. Light pollution has expanded, certainly, but remote hill forts still offer relatively dark skies, where stars appear in numbers approaching historical visibility. Standing on the earthworks at night, watching the Milky Way arc overhead, creates temporal connection. This is what they saw, this same celestial display, these same patterns rotating through seasons, the universe indifferent to how thoroughly human circumstances have transformed. Seasons still turn. Spring still brings new growth to the hillsides. Summer still warms the earth and lengthens days. Autumn still paints the landscape in amber and gold before winter strips it to essential forms. The cyclical patterns that governed Iron Age life continue their eternal repetition, binding modern observers to ancient rhythms deeper than cultural change. The hill forts remind us of continuity and change simultaneously. The same landscape, utterly transformed. The same human impulses for security, community, and connection to place, expressed through completely different mechanisms. The same basic needs, food, shelter, social bonds, met through evolved solutions. The earthworks themselves are both monuments to what was and reminders of what persists. Some hill forts host modern druids conducting ceremonies based on partial reconstructions of ancient practices. Whether these ceremonies bear any resemblance to actual Iron Age rituals remains unknowable, but the impulse itself, to mark significant times, to gather in elevated places, to acknowledge connections to land and history, echoes something fundamental that perhaps transcends specific cultures and time periods. Research continues refining understanding. New excavations, new analytical techniques, and new theoretical frameworks. The story of the hill forts gets revised regularly as evidence accumulates and interpretations evolve. What seemed certain decades ago becomes questioned. What seemed unknowable yields to new investigative methods. The past doesn't change, but our understanding of it does, constantly, and perhaps that's appropriate. The hill forts weren't static when occupied. They evolved through their active centuries, adapted to changing needs, and reflected ongoing processes rather than fixed states. That they continue evolving in how they're understood and used seems consistent with their fundamental nature as living places rather than frozen monuments. The grass bends in the wind, just as it bent 3,000 years ago. The sun sets behind the same western hills, though the valley holds lights now that will never fully extinguish. And the earthworks endure, patient witnesses to human occupation past and present, waiting for whatever future generations will make of these grass-covered banks and subtle ditches that mark where people once decided elevation mattered enough to permanently reshape a hilltop. The hill forts exist now primarily as questions. What exactly were they for? How did communities organize themselves within and around them? What specific events unfolded within these earthwork circuits? The questions outnumber answers substantially, leaving vast spaces where uncertainty and speculation create provisional understanding subject to constant revision. But perhaps the uncertainty itself carries value. The hill forts resist simple categorization. They were military installations and peaceful settlements, defensive positions and community centers, practical solutions and symbolic statements. The complexity reflects reality more accurately than any neat, singular explanation could. Human communities have always been complicated, motivated by multiple simultaneous concerns, their actions interpretable through various frameworks, all containing partial truth. The people who built and occupied these places have vanished into that prehistoric silence before written records. We don't know their names, their specific stories, or their individual personalities, dreams, and fears. What remains are the traces of their collective actions, the earthworks they raised, the artifacts they made and discarded, and the patterns of their settlements and activities. These archaeological remnants become our entire connection to millennia of human experience. Yet that connection tenuous and fragmented as it is, still matters. The hill forts testify to human capacity for sustained communal effort toward long-term goals. They demonstrate sophisticated understanding of landscape, engineering, and social organization. They show communities choosing to invest enormous labor in defensive and social infrastructure, making collective decisions about resource allocation and strategic priorities. The choices made by these Iron Age communities shaped the landscape in ways that persist into the present. Walking the British countryside, you encounter these earthworks regularly, some dramatic and obvious, others subtle and easily overlooked, but collectively representing a massive centuries-long project of landscape modification. The British lowlands are a cultural landscape shaped by sustained human presence, bearing scars and enhancements from successive generations who each left their mark. Modern life proceeds largely unaware of this layered history underfoot. People live in valleys near hill forts without particularly noticing them. Farmers plow around earthworks without necessarily knowing their origins. Hikers walk circuits without recognizing they're following paths established millennia ago. The hill forts have become naturalized, incorporated into the landscape so thoroughly that their artificial nature often goes unnoticed. But for those who attend to them, the hill forts offer perspective on time, change, and persistence. They remind us that current arrangements aren't permanent or inevitable. Previous societies made different choices, organized themselves differently, and found other solutions to fundamental human needs for security and community and connection to place. Understanding these alternatives doesn't provide direct blueprints for contemporary life, but it expands imagination about possibilities. The hill forts also demonstrate that substantial achievements don't require technological sophistication. What they required was patience, coordination, sustained effort, and multi-generational commitment. The tools were simple: bronze and stone, wood and antler, human and animal muscle. The engineering was practical rather than elegant, but the results endured, accomplishing their purposes and outlasting their builders by thousands of years. There's something humbling about encountering these remains. Your own life, its concerns, achievements, and struggles will fade into similar obscurity eventually. The specific details that seem so important now will become meaningless to future generations who won't know your name or story. What might persist are only traces of collective actions, patterns of how your society organized itself, and artifacts from daily life that future archaeologists might excavate and interpret through frameworks you can't imagine. This perspective isn't meant to be depressing. Rather, it's liberating in a way, freeing you from excessive worry about personal legacy while highlighting the importance of collective action and maintenance. What endures are communal achievements, social structures, accumulated knowledge, and physical modifications of the world that persist beyond individual lifespans. The hill forts teach patience, the slow work of building over generations, maintaining across centuries, and accepting that individual contribution is just a fragment of a larger ongoing process. Modern culture often emphasizes immediate results, individual achievement, and rapid progress. The hill forts offer counterpoint: long effort, collective work, and incremental progress accumulating to substantial change. They also teach humility about our own permanence. These Iron Age communities probably felt their settlements were permanent, their earthworks eternal. They couldn't imagine the day when their home would be just grass-covered ruins that occasional academics study and hikers walk past without real understanding. Yet that day came, just as similar days will come for all current settlements and achievements we consider solid and enduring. But there's also a continuity message. The people left, but people remained. The specific hill fort settlements ended, but communities persisted in new arrangements. Human life continued, adapted, and evolved. The fundamental patterns, seeking security, building homes, raising children, making tools, celebrating seasons, managing death, persisted even as specific expressions changed. We're connected to those ancient communities through these ongoing human patterns. Standing on a hill fort at sunset, wind moving through grass, distant valley growing dim while elevated ground catches last light. You can feel that connection. Not mystical exactly, but real nonetheless. The same sun setting over the same hills, viewed from the same elevated position, though everything else has changed. That consistency of sun and hills and elevation creates a thread connecting the present observer to countless previous observers who stood similarly and watched similarly and thought similarly about light and time and transience. The hill forts will continue fading gradually. The earthworks will slowly erode, settlements below will eventually expand around and perhaps over them, and future changes will layer onto accumulated past modifications. But barring catastrophic disruption, the basic forms will persist for centuries more, grass-covered, softened, but still readable as intentional human modification of landscape for purposes that archaeologists will continue debating and visitors will continue imagining. And perhaps that's a sufficient legacy, to persist as questions more than answers, to provoke curiosity about past lives and past choices, to demonstrate that humans have always been builders and organizers and community makers, and to show that ordinary people doing consistent work can achieve extraordinary things that outlast them by millennia. The silent guardians watch over nothing now, their defensive function obsolete, their occupants long gone. But they guard something else: memory of human capacity, evidence of sustained communal achievement, and a reminder that current arrangements are just one temporary solution to eternal challenges of how to live together safely and productively. As darkness settles completely and stars emerge in their eternal patterns, the hill forts become silhouettes against the sky, dark, curved lines distinguishing elevated ground from surrounding terrain. Tomorrow, people will walk here without thinking much about it. Children will play on ancient earthworks. Dogs will chase balls across former settlement spaces. Sheep will graze the banks. And the hills will remain, patient, persistent, bearing their layers of history with the same indifference they brought to accumulating those layers originally. Just hills, really. But hills that remember, in the way landscape remembers through persistent form, what humans once chose to make of them. The story isn't finished. The hill forts continue existing, continue changing, continue being interpreted and used and misunderstood, and gradually become better understood. Future generations will bring new questions and new frameworks and new technologies for investigation. The sites will yield new information, provoke new debates, and serve new purposes. But tonight, on this particular hill fort, under these specific stars, the only sound is wind through grass and the occasional distant bark of a dog who's probably not even aware they're occupying a space where dogs barked for centuries and might bark for centuries more, all of them equally oblivious to the weight of time, pressing these hills into something more than simple geography. And perhaps that's perfect. The continuation of simple life across these historically saturated spaces, the mundane present occupying the extraordinary past, tomorrow arriving whether or not we understand yesterday, and the eternal human process of making homes and meaning from whatever landscape we inherit and whatever circumstances we face. The hill forts endure as a gentle reminder that we're neither first nor last, that our moment is just a fragment of a longer story, that what we build might persist in unexpected ways, and that the land remembers even after memory fades, holding traces of everyone who walked here before in its contours and its silences.
you.